We are live on YouTube and Facebook at YSQFM or at Q95 FM radio. Please share the live. Invite your friends to join the Q family. Get the latest breaking local, regional, and international news and happenings. We certainly wish to acknowledge you on the other online streaming platforms. This is the Global View on Q. It is Tuesday, 11th of January 2022, and it's just about 7:36 in the studios at Q95, the big station. It's the second Tuesday of 2022, and I'm your host, Sheridan G. Gregoire, Mr. G. My distinguished guest tonight, UWP leader Lennox Linton, Dominica Freedom Party leader Bernard Ito hopefully will join us a little bit later. National Joint Action Movement President uh, Kent Vital is with us. Concerned Citizens Movement leader Zari Manuel will hopefully be joining us a little later if he can. He did indicate that he would. And then, of course, our illustrious economist and financial consultant, Dr. Thompson Fontaine, is with us. He should be asleep now, but he's wide awake, trying to be in this discussion with us, and we are very happy that Thompson Fontaine could be with us. The topic tonight is the economy of governance and unity in 2022. The whole question of unity in 2022, with some focus on the imperative for electoral and campaign finance reforms in 2022. We will examine the prospects and the imperative for unity in 2022. We'll look at concerns over the consistent rise in cost of government over the years, the influence of big money in election campaigns resulting in no-bid contracts to foreign construction firms, to the detriment of local contractors, heavy equipment operators, and small businesses. I will ask my guests to help us find the answers to a few of these questions, like are the frequent capital project cost overruns and constant requests for supplementary appropriations. This is a symptom of a much deeper problem. Is Dominic experiencing corruption in high office? And are Dominicans paying the price of what corruption breeds in societies? Is the standard of living and quality of life of the average Dominican satisfactory? Is it up to mark? Is Dominica's middle class and indigenous small entrepreneurial sector experiencing diminishing returns and shrinking, and is it disappearing actually? So while vast cash flows from mono CBI passport economy programs go to just a select few, is the resilience and sustainability of Dominica's people, our natural environment, and our architectural heritage now a thing of the past? So will there be peace? Will there be justice? Will there be unity? Yes, that seemingly elusive unity, harmony and well-being among our Afro-Caribbean and Kalinago brothers and sisters before our nature island gets to its 50th anniversary of independence in 2028. So please stay right here with us on the big station for this conversation, the economy of governance and unity in 2022, with some focus on the imperative for electoral and campaign finance reforms. So as I said a little earlier, my distinguished guest, Mr. Lennox Linton, Mr. Bernard Ito, who hopefully will join us, and Jam Leader Ken Vital and Mr. Zari Manuel, and then of course, Dr. Thompson Fontaine. Hopefully they will help us with some of the questions. We will discuss the good, the bad, the ugly, and the dangerous, as we always do. And we will examine these issues and hopefully make some recommendations for the way forward for unity in 2022, with some telephone inputs and suggestions from our brothers and sisters at home and abroad. And as usual, we'll do all of this with no anger, with no malice, no personal attacks, no vilification, no divisiveness, just simply bringing back civility, caring society, good governance, peace, and love among our Kalinago and Afro-Caribbean brothers and sisters. So wherever you are in Dominica, in the region, globally, join this conversation on the Global View on Q and have your say, as you do every Tuesday with me, Mr. G only on Q95, the big station. I will also expect our panelists that they will look at what has been described as an existential crisis of governance. I hope they will tackle a question as to what is the state of our democracy, the rule of law, and integrity in public office at this time. Is our nature isle doomed to become a dog eat dog society, living on and off each other rather than living with each other and loving each other? Are our electoral laws being blatantly breached? Where are the promised electoral reforms and campaign finance reforms? What can civil society do now to remove these threats? Like the revelations contained in the Director of Audit's 2019 report. Can we do better than we are doing now? And the big question, are we better off now than we were 21 years ago? Let me just say quickly a big thank you to our healthcare providers and frontline workers doing their best to keep us safe from this deadly coronavirus and from its variant Omicron. Please follow the correct advice, guidelines, and protocols. Stay safe and stay alive. So I'm happy to have you with us tonight. And so wherever you are in your neck of the woods in Dominica and the region and in the global community, I would like to really start off by going to our esteemed, illustrious Dr. Thompson Fontaine. He's all the way out there in South Sudan. I don't know what on earth he's doing up at this time of night, but he's up and he's looking as fresh and energetic as ever. I couldn't do that. So let me just go over to Dr. Thompson Fontaine to get the ball rolling. Dr. Fontaine, I don't know whether you're hearing me and if your mic is unmuted. It's possible that Dr. Fontaine's mic might be muted because
a very good evening to you, Sheridan, and of course to the esteemed leader, Honorable Lennox Linton. Let me say good evening as well to my pal Kent Vital. It's good to see you, and congratulations, by the way, Kent. We've not yet spoken, but congratulations on your recent appointment to the position in charge of NJAM. We should every success with that. A special good evening to you, Lambi, and of course, Mr. G, and all of our listeners who are tuning in at this time. It feels like it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon for me. I'm so excited to be part of this program tonight and to be dialoguing with you and with the esteemed leader and with Kent and hopefully Bernard and Zah, who will join later. Let me just say that I'm having a little bit of difficulty with the technology. I'm not able to hear you when you speak to me like when I'm hearing you through Facebook, very clear on Facebook. So there might be a slight delay. That's why I was taking a small time to come on. Okay. But having said that, Sheridan, I wanted to start with some of the issues that you raised in my brief introduction. I wanted to speak to the issue of where we are in Dominica, the rule of law, and some of the bigger questions that we concern ourselves with, including electoral reform. And I want to start by addressing the Prime Minister of this country. You know, Prime Minister Roosevelt Skerrit has been at the helm of government since 2004, so over 17 years. And I think that he must be thinking right now in terms of his legacy, because after you've been in office for that length of time, it gets to the point where you have to start asking yourself, what am I going to leave this country with? How will people remember me after I've exited the scene as Prime Minister? And the Prime Minister has a unique opportunity right now to help define his legacy and what he can do for Dominica at this time. And I believe that would be a really great legacy, is to leave the country in a firm state of democracy. What do I mean by that? That we, the people of Dominica, do not have to resort to violence, that the police will not be set upon Dominicans because they are demanding or because they've taken to the streets in protests against the unavailability of the government refusing to allow electoral reform. So I think he has a unique opportunity there to really define his legacy. And what he needs to do in this case is, as Prime Minister, do like the other Caribbean countries have done and declare that from now on, that Dominica will have free and fair elections, that his party and any other party that wishes to contest elections will be at the mercy of the electorate, as it rightly should be in a democracy, that no party should seek to get an edge over the other through throwing obscene amounts of finances towards a campaign, that no party should be disadvantaged because they do not have the same level of resources as the other party, that this very divisive type of politics that we have seen will be a thing of the past. I don't think the Prime Minister can set that stage tonight and tell the people of Dominica that he is prepared to have free and fair elections. He is prepared to have a clean voters list. He is prepared to undertake electoral and campaign finance reform. And this will be the beginning of his legacy. Because as he gets ready to exit the political scene in Dominica, this is what is going to leave the people of Dominica with: a country that is free of political violence, a country where we use our limited resources not to fight each other, but our limited resources to work together to build a unified Dominica. And I think that is where the Prime Minister can really help all of us in Dominica. He can take on that responsibility as the Prime Minister of the country, and he can speak to the people of Dominica in a way that they will understand that he is really committed to this. That's what we're talking about, legacy, all right? We don't want the Prime Minister's legacy to be, well, as it is now, missing billions and all the rest of things that the scandals that surround them. I believe he can make a clean break with this by focusing on electoral reform, giving the people free and fair elections so that we have we begin to build a tradition. I mean, what we saw, for example, in the last election with military personnel from other islands coming into Dominica as if our democracy was under threat. Innocent people in Salisbury been shot. These things must be a thing of the past. Police rushing Parliament and roughing up, opposition parliamentarians. Let these things be a thing of the past. Let us focus our energies on working together, on building our agriculture sector, on building our manufacturing sector, on building our tourism sector. And let us do it in a spirit of harmony. Let us do it in a spirit of togetherness. We are too small a country to be so divided. So that's my appeal. That's how I would like to start this discussion, Mr. G, with an appeal to the Prime Minister to begin to think of his legacy for Dominica.
Yes, and Thompson, that's a very, very good start. I mean, to get us going. I mean, I know you have a lot more that you will be contributing as we go along, but certainly you're off to a good start. I mean, you certainly have got us thinking about free and fair elections. We know what's coming, and I'm sure that the leader of the opposition and the EWP leader, Honorable Lennox Linton, will speak a little bit more about those things when he makes his contributions as we go along. Obviously, you mentioned the question of the missing billions, which I know that he is the person who really originated that thing and kept briefing us on some of the money that is allegedly missing. And of course, Thompson, you also mentioned the Prime Minister's legacy. And I think you're quite right. If the Prime Minister really wanted to have a legacy, I mean, all of the leaders that we've had before, there is some legacy that we could look at. Certainly, I think free and fair elections would be a good way to start. But one of the things I fear as I go over to the opposition leader, Mr. Lennox Linton, is that I have not heard much talk, not even from our legal luminaries, Dennis Byron, when he was here, about the question of campaign finance reform. I'm not even sure, and maybe you can help us, Mr. Linton, whether in fact campaign finance reform was part of Sir Dennis Byron's, what he had to do in terms of reference. I'm not sure, but we didn't hear much of that. We heard about electoral laws, and I know for a fact that all of the local groups and the groups that got together, civil society, made up of a wide range of groups, everybody, they did indicate that campaign finance reform was also a key in all of this. And we do know, in fact, that most of these islands in the region have done it. They've done it well. Jamaica is a good model. Barbados is trying to do something. I know that Antigua, St. Kitts, Trinidad have done that. Have some good models. The Jamaica model is particularly good. So as I go over to you, Honorable Opposition Leader, Mr. Lennox Linton, maybe you can, let's get going with some of your thoughts on all of those. Hope you can unmute your mic.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. G. Very happy New Year to you. Very happy New Year to the other members of the panel. Dr. Fontaine, good to see you, all the way from Juba in South Sudan. Good that you could join us. Very good evening to Mr. Kent Vital and Mr. Bernardi too, and of course to Lambie in the studio. Very good evening to the people of Dominica, at home on island in Dominica, and all around the world. Happy New Year to everyone. Mr. G, the economy of Dominica is in trouble. And it is in trouble not because the country doesn't have money. It is in trouble because the money of the country is being misappropriated and being mismanaged. And when we talk about the economy, we're very, very simply talking about that something that is hoisted on our trade of goods and our trade of services to ourselves and to the rest of the world. It is through that process that people are engaged in wealth creation or employment income that will take care of their basic needs and allow them to thrive to the extent possible in the circumstances of our nature island. So we look at the areas that drive our trade in goods and services: agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, construction, primarily for the time being at the start, just for the purpose of setting the tone. And you would look at those four growth engines, and recognize that in every one of those four growth engines, we are experiencing severe difficulty. In manufacturing, different to what's going on in tourism, in construction, different to what's going on in tourism, manufacturing, and agriculture, because we do have quite a bit of construction activity taking place in Dominica, but we have seen a decline in agricultural output in the last 18 years under the watch of Roosevelt Skerrit. If we would like to focus on his 18 years as leader, we have seen a decline in manufacturing output. We've seen a decline in tourism output as well. And what we're not seeing, notwithstanding all of the challenges that can be put on the table, all of the difficulties that we face, what we're not seeing is any real plan for correcting for turning around the failures and for dealing with the issues that have confronted us, why our performance at this stage in those growth engines of the economy is not as good as it could be. So remember years ago, if you go back to the 90s, just a little trek back to the 90s, you would see an agriculture industry sector in Dominica that was generating significant output through banana and non-banana agriculture. Bananas, of course, had already begun to decline because of the circumstances of the market, which we never really dealt with properly or successfully. And so our volume output in banana is all the way down near zero right now. In those days, we had manufacturing as well. We had, in addition to income of $80 to $100 million from bananas every year, We had significant income coming from manufacturing as well, because you had leading the manufacturing charge, Dominica Coconut Products, the Colgate-Palmolive plant in latter years, generating or exporting 1,000 20-foot containers of finished goods every year. And you had other manufacturing entities around that building capability. You had the tourism sector that was at the point in 2004, thereabout, the early part of that decade, receiving over 300,000 cruise passengers into Dominica. The stay-over arrivals in Dominica had reached 74,000 by 1999. And for the next 20 years, beginning in 2000, you saw stay-over visitors in Dominica average out at about 72,000 persons per year, with one notable exception of the 2019 election year, when we saw a huge spike. 89,000 people visited Dominica in that election year. But we have spoken about the diversification of the economy, away from reliance on bananas and so on into more tourism. Well, that really hasn't happened. And even the major thrust that we've seen in the last 5-10 years, using monies from the sale of Dominican passports to finance hotel development, hotel and resort development. The shining example we have so far is the Kempinski Resort and Spa in Portsmouth. I don't know if it's fully complete, but people have been talking about it. What we have not been hearing is the impact that that development has had on the economy. What has it done so far? What is the amount of occupancy that we are getting at the Kempinski? How much employment is it supporting, etc.? Because we have it. And as a result of us having it, two gentlemen who were involved in the construction of it using money induced from investors by the sale of the Dominica passport, those gentlemen made off with 163 million EC dollars for themselves, $81.5 million each, before the hotel had welcomed its first guests. I'm saying that to say, every time we talk about the economy of Dominica, which, as I said, is hoisted on our trade of goods and services, the question comes up, yes, we have an economy, but who is it working for? And more you see an economy that is working not so well for the people of Dominica, but very well for the friends of the government outside of Dominica. And the best way we look at that right now is to see what happens with the sale of our passports. Because while the other areas of economic activity have declined, this citizenship by investment, which surfaced under the Dominica Freedom Party back in the early 1990s, has grown to the point where it is bringing into Dominica, it is allowing Dominica to earn billions of dollars from the sale of citizenship passports. But we are not seeing the full benefit of those billions of dollars. And that now presents an existentialist threat for the economy, because see how we have shifted significantly away from agriculture, manufacturing, tourism, construction. Look at how we have done very little with the renewable energy sector. Look at how we have done very little with the cultural industries sector. Look at where we have done very little with the financial services sector. And look at how well we have done with the sale of passports, becoming the primary source of income for the colony of Dominica. But notice what is happening. Bananas were being sold by farmers from around the country to Britain. Britain was paying the farmers of Dominica. The farmers were spending the money in the economy. The government was picking up taxes and using those taxes to run the affairs of government. Right now, we don't have income to talk about from growth engines, because every single one is underperforming. What we have is a government selling the passports of the country and bringing that money into its coffers and deciding that a significant share of it will remain outside, using those monies for activities in the construction sector, but scheming Dominicans out of meaningful participation by choosing its friends who will receive no bid contracts and determine how the billions that sit outside of Dominica's treasury are spent primarily for their benefit and secondarily for the benefit of a few Dominicans. And when we talk about the economy, we have to understand it is not going to go anywhere like that. And 2022, the crossover from 2021 into 2022, offers us another opportunity for the government to be upfront, for the government to be fair, just, honest with the people of Dominica in the stewardship of the finances of the people of Dominica. You'll recall, I just spoke about back in the 90s, the 80s. In those days, we had a GDP, right? Gross domestic product, the total value of goods and services in the economy, which was significantly more than the amount of debt that we operated with. Right now, our debt is higher than the value of goods and services in our economy. But I want to make the point that that is not, while that is what is recorded in the numbers for the IMF and in the numbers from the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank, that is not necessarily the case. Because in truth and in fact, we have a lot more money hidden overseas, being privately held unlawfully overseas, than we have in the Dominican economy. And those monies outside significantly dwarf the amount of debt that we have. So we arrive at this debt to GDP of 114% simply because we are only using the CBI money that comes into the treasury for that calculation. If we bring on board the amount of money that Mr. Skerritt has sitting outside under the control of Anthony Hayden and others into the equation, the debt to GDP ratio will change significantly, because you'll be talking about total value of goods and services in the region of $4 to $5 billion compared to a debt stock of about $1.5 billion. And this is a crisis. There's no other way to describe it. And it requires all the good men and women of conscience in Dominica to take on board this reality. And whatever you think about, whatever side you sit on, whether you're on the left side, the right side, whether you're in the front side, the back side, or the downside, the issue is the failure, the refusal of the government to put the monies from the sale of the People's Passport fully at the disposal of the people of Dominica and to go towards the well-being and progress of the people of Dominica. We have to start there at the very beginning of honesty in the stewardship, with the stewardship of our finances. We are not there yet. And like I said just now, I'm hoping the 2021-2022 crossover is the time that we do the right thing and step up to the plate. On the question of electoral reform, Sheridan asked a question about campaign finance and whether that was part of the remit of Sir Dennis Byron, who is the government's sole consultant on this matter and on whom the nation anxiously awaits a report. Our party, the United Workers' Party, did interact with Sir Dennis Byron during the course of that consultation, And it is on the basis of that interaction that I can say that, yes, campaign finance reform was part of the remit of Sir Dennis Byron, and we fully expect, based on the interactions we've had, based on the proposals put forward, based on the questions that Sir Dennis himself had in consultation, that there will be recommendations for campaign finance legislation in the recommendations to come from Sir Dennis Byron. I would be very disappointed if they're none.
So Lennox, I'm glad that you sort of at this point you sort of close on this note here. I mean, later on, I'm sure that we're going to come up with a lot more substance and meat on some of the things that you mentioned. But I wanted to go over to Kent, because you mentioned a number of things here, which I think are essential for Kent, because Kent is in the, I don't know what you call your organization. You'll tell us more about it, Ken. I know it is NJAM, National Joint Action Movement. It's sort of an umbrella body. Very hopeful that a lot of people are going to join up with like-minded thinking, people who have certain things in mind for the good of the country. And certainly, I would expect that you are interested in the notion of unity that I spoke about, because how are we, as Lennox is saying, how do we get to that point if everyone does not get together? You know, we basically with the same objective in mind, to build the country, to build the people up, live their lives and the standard of living, the quality of life, and so on, improve the economy, restructure the economy so that the major growth pillars are put in order, and so that you can see the growth and you can see the foreign earnings, you can see the employment, and you can see the wages and, you know, the living wages and so on. In all those sectors, you mentioned agriculture, you mentioned manufacturing, you mentioned the energy sector and tourism and agribusiness and so on. But he did say that we need honesty in the stewardship of our finances. Kent, as I come over to you, I want you to see if you can comment on some of those things and see how it is that this country, all the various sectors, all the various interests, can unite in a common cause in 2022, not only for electoral reform, but to see how we can build our economy and build our people, improve their lives. I'll go over to you now, Kent, if you can unmute your mic.
Right. Thanks, Sheridan. And for the sake of time, I'll just say hello to everybody. Let me answer that question with something that's not normal per se in answering those kinds of questions, but someone sent me this inspirational thing on one of the WhatsApp chats that I'm on, and I want to read it because the essence of it is really what NJAM is all about, the National Joint Action Movement. So just permit me to read this, and it says here, duck or eagle, you decide. So this guy is saying, I was at the airport when a taxi driver approached me. The first thing I noticed in the cab was a phrase, which I soon read, duck or eagle, you decide. The second thing I noticed was a clean, shiny cab. The driver well-dressed, white shirt, well-pressed pants with a tie. The taxi driver got out, opened the door for me and said, I am John, your chauffeur. While I'm putting your luggage away, I'd like you to read this on the card, what my mission is. On the card was written, John's mission, to get my clients to their destination quickly, safely, and economically, while providing a friendly environment. I was impressed. The interior of the cab was equally clean. John asked, would you like some coffee? Joking with him, I said, no, I'd rather have a juice. He immediately replied, no problem. I have a thermos with regular juice and also diet juice, as well as water, he also told me. If you wish to read, I have today's newspaper and also some magazines. As the ride began, John told me, these are the radio stations I have, and this is the repertoire they play. As if that wasn't enough, John asked me if the temperature on the air conditioning was good. Then he told me what was the best route to my destination, and if I wanted to talk to him, or if he preferred that I not be interrupted. Then I asked, do you always serve your customers like this? No, he replied, not always. Only in the last 2 years. My first few years as a taxi driver, I spent most of my time complaining, just like the other taxi drivers. One day I listened to a doctor who was a specialist in personal development. He wrote a book called Who You Are Makes the Difference. He said, if you get up in the morning expecting to have a lousy day, you certainly will. Don't be a duck. Be an eagle. Ducks just make noise and complain. Eagles soar above the park. I was all the time making noise and complaining. So I decided to change my attitude and be an eagle. I looked at the other cabs and drivers, the dirty cabs, the unfriendly drivers, the unsatisfied customers. I decided to make some changes. Since my customers responded well, I made a few more changes. In my first year as an eagle, I doubled my turnover. This year, I have already quadrupled it. You are lucky you took my cab today. I am no longer at the cab stand. My customers book through my cell phone or send me a message. If I can't pick up, I get a trusted eagle taxi driver friend to do the job. John was different. He offered a limousine service in a regular cab. John, the taxi driver, decided to stop making noise and complaining like ducks do and started flying over the group like eagles do. You will get the rest of the GIF. I won't go further because I don't want to take too much time. But that's exactly what we need to now do as a people. We have spoken quite a bit in the face of all kinds of injustices, in the face of economic depression. And it's time that we change, we become different, that we do not just talk about it. It's time now that we do something about it. Now, what are we going to do about it? What is it that we have to do? Well, we've got to look at the problem we have. And we have to understand what is causing the exact problem that we have. And our solution has to be in relation to that. John understood that. John understood the problem. And therefore, he tailored his solution to that problem. That's what we've got to do. We've got to become eagles. Now, what are the problems we have? Lennox rightly explained. Thompson rightly explained. So I don't need to go into the details here. But from everything they explained, it seems to me that what is happening to us in Dominica is that we are quickly becoming a failed state. Now, I mentioned that on a chat that was on, or somebody picked me up on that and said, what do you mean we have a failed state? So I said to him, we may not necessarily be a failed state in the pure sense of the word, but we are certainly getting there. And I want to explain this a bit. So if you Google this, you'll find different little explanations of what's a failed state. But one of them you will find says a state whose political or economic system has become so weak that the government is no longer in control. You might say we are not there. Rightly so, we are not there yet. But let me explain to you that we are getting there. Now, we are getting there not because we could not have been somewhere different, because we could have been somewhere different. Lennox explained the CBI monies. He explained many things. We could have done a lot better. We look at our Caribbean neighbors, St. Kitts, Antigua, St. Lucia, St. Vincent. I've been reading about St. Vincent recently. And Grenada, they have all gone ahead of us. They have all done differently. but we haven't. So it's not because we couldn't have done better. It's because of bad governance. It's because of corruption. It's because of failures that needn't be. And because our economy is failing so badly, our people are suffering. Our people are suffering real badly. If it wasn't for the CBI, and even the CBI, the little that comes in, I mean, the mismanagement of those funds, and the illegal handling of those funds, means that the bulk of it apparently is not benefiting Dominica. But even the little that comes in, that's part of what drives some of the activity. Our diaspora people have been assisting their people at home. That's about 7.2, 7.5% over the last 20 years of GDP. A greater contribution from our diaspora people than we have from agriculture and tourism combined. So minus that, minus also the illegal activity. And let me tell you, there's a lot of illegal activity going on in Dominica, drug trafficking and other illegal activity. Minus these free things, what do you have? You have economic desperation. People, add to that what we have had with Maria, add to that what we have had with COVID, and our people are desperate. Minus that, you have an economy that is very, very weak. So we are beginning to fit the definition. Now, there's a risk that the CBI could be moved because we are so mismanaging this thing that we could lose this any day now. And of course, if those countries clamp down seriously on illicit activity, even that will fall apart. Now, when your economy is so weak, and when your governance is so weak as well, there will come a time when people will say enough is enough. When you look at the governance and people are beginning to say, oh, the economy is already so weak, we can hardly make ends meet. And at the same time, our freedoms have been taken away. We cannot elect the right government. We need to take us out of this. The persons are managing the economy for their own benefit. As Lennox said, it's not that there is not resources that could have been used, but when those resources are mismanaged and people are seeing this, their rights are taken away. We are becoming a police state. And Thompson mentioned what happened in Salisbury and so on. When you begin to see all of that happening, tell me, is either people take it and we become slaves in our own land, we become people who have no liberty on top of poverty, on top of really lack. It's either people take it or at one point they're going to say no. We need to be able to fix this. At least we need to be able to elect a government who is able to come up with strategies to turn the situation around. And when they realize they have been prevented from electing the government that they want, the point will be reached when people will decide enough is enough. And you will have the second element of a failed state. So already economic systems are weak. The second element is where the government, where the political system is weak. And it's already weak. It's just that it's been controlled through policing, it's been controlled through police intimidation and so on. But the point will reach where people will say, no, it's enough is enough. And when this falls apart, you have political violence, you have unruliness on the streets, you have economic impoverishment. When you've got all of this, we are certainly headed towards a failed state. That is the reality. That is the truth in our land. What does NJAM want? We want to prevent that from happening. And when we understand what's happening, that the greatest reason for where we are is bad governance. And that's the truth. We all know it. We have, as you say, Sheridan, a crisis of governance. That is really what is our biggest challenge. Look at all the Caribbean islands. I mean, some people will try to make excuses and say it's Maria, it's COVID, it's this, it's that. But no, the biggest challenge we have, I'm not saying these things haven't affected us, but with proper governance, we would have mechanisms in place to overcome some of these things and to cope with some of these things like St. Kitts did and is doing with the CBI funds. So we have a governance crisis, and the question is, how do we solve it? At the base of that governance crisis is our electoral system. Is a government who refuses to go by the ballot. And we all know it. We all know what happened in the last 2 elections. In the last elections, certainly I am convinced that if elections were free and fair, we would have had a different result. The people were prevented from selecting the government that they wanted. So what are people to do? When you are trying to put in the government that you want, or at least to have free and fair elections, you are prevented from doing this. What are people to do? Keep talking or decide together we're going to stand together, because we are at a point that is so critical, a point where if we don't stand, our country fails. We are at a point that if we don't stand, we suffer. We are at a point if we don't stand, sooner or later the police will walk into our homes and shoot us. We are at a point if we don't stand, our country will be wrecked. I am not saying this in jest or for politics. That's the reality. We saw what happened in Salisbury, Thompson, Solid. They were prepared. I mean, every time I think of that, I am amazed at what happened in Salisbury. That's the reality. When our people are faced with that reality, when you're prevented from making the kinds of change that you want, at the base of it is our governance problem. But we cannot bring about the governance changes, the change of government that we want, because elections have been are not free and fair. Then the only thing left is for people to stand together, because that's the only thing that will count. Because the situation is such that we need to stand together. And if we don't stand together and do what we need to do, then we will lose our country. So here's what we're saying. It's time for us to stand together as a people. It's time for us to approach this problem as one. No, we could start with a discussion. When I say start with a discussion, let me tell you what I mean. The truth is, I personally don't think we have a legitimate government. They are there, and for the sake of running the country, we are abiding by a government, but they're not legitimate as far as I'm concerned. So there's a need to come to the table. There's a need for reconciliation, because you're not a legitimate government. But rather than getting into a situation where there's upheavals and so on, let's come to the table and talk. Now, a good basis to start to have a discussion is for there to be electoral reform. The basis has been set for it. Byron has come, and I don't know what is preventing whether he has finished his study, or what is preventing the release of the study if it's finished. But there have been groups before him. Sheridan, you mentioned it. Several local groups that met together, the unions with the faith organizations, and which met and crafted some very good recommend. Everything is in place to do what needs to be done. And really, that's a good place to start. That's a good place to start to begin to seek reconciliation.
So Ken, here's my question. I'm glad you said that's a good place to start. I want to just come to you. Two things I want to put to you before I go over to Bernard. The question is, one, clarify something for me, because there's been a lot of talk going around. NJAM might be a political party in the making. I want you to clear that up for us tonight, so that there'll be no doubt about what NJAM really is, right? Nothing you've said here so far has given me the impression that NJAM is planning to be a political party, but since that has been out there, clarified. And secondly, I listened to your vice president, Mr. Severin McKenzie, on another program. He was making it clear that NJAM intends not necessarily to await a report from Sir Byron, although he has great respect for Sir Byron, but it might be necessary to wait until that time to start looking at the legislation that exists in some of the other countries that have done the electoral and campaign finance reforms, and begin maybe drafting some of that for Dominica. Take all the good components of whatever exists in Antigua or Trinidad or St. Kitts, and looking at the Jamaica model, for example, and then say, put something together which all of those groups that we mentioned can come together to look at and say, maybe this is the model that Dominica may want to pursue. I'm not sure whether Sir Byron, and maybe the opposition leader can help me again, I'm not sure whether Sir Byron is mandated to craft legislation. I believe he was asked to provide a report. So maybe when Lennox comes in later, he can tell us whether he'll be doing it. But I'm suggesting that I did hear Mackenzie, so is NJAM going along that path, Ken? Your mic.
Yeah, sorry about that. On the first part of the question, whether NJAM is a political party, the clear answer is no, we're not a political party. But let me clarify. We are in a nation where we need political actions. And NJAM reason for being is that we need to stand together at this point in time in our nation. So part of what we want to do, quite honestly, is work with the political parties, with civic organizations, with church-based organizations, so that we can understand that our nation needs to be saved, that we need to correct our situation, that we can act together to secure electoral reform, and then we can act together to get better governance. I will say it very clearly. I will say it very, very, very clearly. The government in power now, they have done and demonstrated in every single way that they are the reason why we are where we are, that we are becoming a failed state, that our democracy has been taken away. We need to remove this government. We can come to the table and have a discussion, and NJAM would love to foster that with the government, and that's why let's start with electoral reform. But short of this, we have to come together as a people to ensure that votes are not split, that we act as one. No, we are not there yet. We have to have those kinds of discussion. NJAM wants to be part of a credible group and capable group that can cause that to happen, so our nation can come out better, that we can save our nation from becoming a failed state.
All right, so Kent, so just to be clear, then in terms of what Mr. Mackenzie said, the commitment that he made, and is NJAM pursuing that, because this to me is beyond the talk. It is not a point of action where you're actually getting legal draftsmen to download the electronic versions of the Jamaica model or whatever it is and begin to craft a bill that can be, all the groups can come together and say, okay, we agree that kind of legislation is good. It looks good for our campaign finance reforms and our electoral reforms. And we can ask the Electoral Commission to look at that and so on. Is that something in terms of action that NJAM is looking to do that we can everybody to fall behind?
Yes, it is. And that's why I read what I read at the beginning, because we are moving from complaining and talking to action. We want all of us Dominicans, all of us, all the political parties, all the civil organization. Let's stop talking and let's do. Talking is not bad. I'm not saying it's our role to talk. We should talk. I'm not trying to disparage by using that word. I'm trying to emphasize, though, we have talked so much that now we have to act. Part of the action is exactly what Mackenzie is talking about. We want to put something credible before them. But that is not just to do that. After that, there are other actions that we want all our nation. We have as a people to decide. We need together, stand together to do whatever it takes that's morally right to get electoral reform and to save our country. That's just one of the actions. The other actions, there are several other actions, but we are moving from just talk to actions. There are actions to empower people economically, and there's so much more we will tell you about, but that's just to answer the question most directly.
All right, so Ken, when I come back to the leader of the opposition, Mr. Linton, I'm getting a little feedback from somebody's mic. I'm not sure his mic might be open. But when I come back to Mr. Linton, I will want to put the question to him. And I don't know whether NJAM is going to take that on or somebody else, but certainly it seems to me that there is this committee in Parliament. It's called the Public Accounts Committee. And I think that committee has shown that it's willing to work, but it's not able to because it's not getting information from the public service officials. One of the things that could be another point of action could be to look at the public accounts laws, or whether there's a Public Accounts Act in one of the other countries, whether it's Barbados or one of them, that you could model on and say, okay, here's a good one. Let us also put that up to the officials and let us stand behind that and say, we want public accounts law in the statutes so that it will force the public officials to provide the information to that Public Accounts Committee so it can do it, so carry its fiduciary responsibility to the people. It seems to me that if we can do that, that is another area. Well, let me just go over now to Bernard. because Bernard, you've been with us for a while now. We want to hear from you, and all of those things that we've been mentioning so far. You heard Dr. Thompson Fontaine, you heard Opposition Leader Lennox Linton, you've heard Kent, and you're the leader of the Dominica Freedom Party now. And we've talked about the whole question of unity. You heard Kent saying we need to all get together to try to arrive to some point of action that we can all rally around to get some results in 2022. Give me your thoughts on some of those things that you've heard mentioned, all the problems. Well, we know about the failures of all aspects of the economy. We know about the shortcomings there. Give us your thoughts going forward, Bernard.
Okay. Good evening to everyone. As Kent said, I'll save time by just saying a general good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. I've listened closely, and many good points have been raised. Many of the things that I'm completely in agreement with in terms of the fundamental issues that affect the country. I think one of the most critical turning points in Dominica's history was the election of the rise to power of Roosevelt Skerrit. I mean, that was a pivotal point in Dominica's history. We could have gone either way in our history. We went that way, and as they say, we're living with the results. So that's a pivotal point, because if you look at the time since independence, we've been an independent nation. It's rapidly becoming almost half of that duration has been under the administration of the Roosevelt Skerrit administration. And so really half of Dominica's independence history has been completely distorted, and where we were going and what we're doing and the people we were becoming. The 80s had set a foundation that cleaned up a lot of the turmoil of the 70s, set a foundation of relative peace and prosperity. And we were evolving. Our political development was underway. Politics was much more transparent. There was accountability. The economy was being grounded in indigenous effort and value creation. We were doing the right things. We were laying the path to be a proud nation. We were laying the path to be an independent nation that could do things and take its place on the table of brotherhood of nations. But unfortunately, we went completely left with the rise of the current administration. And I at some point I used to be skeptical whether the government truly is not interested in development. I thought for a long time that maybe they were simply incompetent. Now they are incompetent, but I'm saying I thought for a long time that the intention could have worked. That maybe they were trying, they would try, but that they were not capable. They did not have the right team in place. They did not have the right expertise. They did not understand economics. They didn't understand social development, and they were struggling to define a program of development. But the more I got into this and the more I observed and realized, I think I was off base on that. It's not a matter of competence necessarily. It's a matter of motivations, a matter of incentives. The current government is simply not incentivized, nor has real interest at a deep level of developing the country. Because what is the benefit to them? Because the most promising situation for the government, this current administration, is to keep the people in a state of semi-dependency, where the government is seen as the landlord who hands out gifts and treasures to those they favor, and that in fact to condition the society over decades, that in fact this is the way of the world. And a lot of young people actually in Dominica believe they don't really have a worldview, an orientation, that in fact this is not the way the world naturally is. But a lot of people, young people, believe this is just the way it works. And so the government has conditioned and built this up of having a conditioned society that believes at the slightest drop, for the slightest thing, people have to ask, well, go to Mr. Skerrit. And that seems to be the natural response. And so the government has no real incentive to develop an economy of independent entrepreneurial individuals. It has no incentives to develop a prosperous civil society or prosperous private sector, because all those things weaken, and it's been proven in the history of all progressive liberal democracies has shown that as civil society gets stronger, as it progresses, as it takes its own sphere of influence, that it diminishes the power, the influence that the government has over society. And so the current administration has no interest in creating an empowered, economically and socially and empowered society that does not serve the incentive structure of what they're interested in. There is no real interest in that. And so while the appearance of wishing to do those things, I mean, one can't be too blatant about it, right? One has to keep the act going. So you will do a few things like fix some roads and build some bridges and build some apartments and give the appearance, I call it bling development. You will give the appearance of keeping things afloat. Of course, you want salaries paid. You want people to say, yeah, well, at least they're paying salaries to the civil service, and at least teachers are going to school. They will keep the appearance of social stability to some extent. But if you peel that layer back, there is really no incentive for the government, this government, to create a society that is, as I said, independent of that dependence, because that dependence is the axis, is the basis of their power structure in Dominica. And so it's a matter of incentives. There is no incentives aligned. The government, the current administration, its incentives are not aligned with the incentives of our society to be a prosperous, independent, proud society. The incentives of this current administration is to pursue their own economic and political goals and enrichment. And so when you have two widely disparate sets of incentives, you will get the sort of dysfunctional situation that we have now. So it's not a matter of competence anymore. It's not a matter of, well, they should know they should do this. They should invest in the agricultural sector. They should invest in the tourism sector. This thing should be done with the CBI money. These things are almost obvious. Any rational, reasonable person would look at these things and say, well, obviously you need to develop the economic engines of your country. Of course, you need to invest in your agriculture. Of course, you need to invest in your tourism. Of course, you need to do those things. This is ABC, right? This is 101. This is economics 101. Anyone with a modicum of understanding of economics knows that you must build the value-creating sectors of your economy. What else is there? An economy is simply creating value that others, appreciate, and that you contribute to the world, and in that way you get income. It's a very simple equation: create value, become wealthy. But there is no incentive structure for this current government to create a value creating society. That is actually a diagonal, crossroads to their intention. So I think when we start to think about these economic things and so forth, we really have to view it in that lens, right? Because we could talk about the things that need to be done, so forth and so on, but I don't think we have to view it as simply it's an irrational approach. But it makes sense from their perspective. That's where we are. I mean, when 2000 rolled around, right, the whole world pivoted over to a digital world, right? Things changed radically with the rise of the internet and so on. There were opportunities created for small island states like ours to embrace that knowledge economy. Because what do we have? We've always had smart people, well-educated people who are willing to work hard. And we should have embraced that opportunity to pivot our economy to the knowledge economy. But we have no people who have the incentives and, quite frankly, the capabilities to create that sort of economy. So we struggle. On the issue of electoral reform, I also think this is a bit of a red herring, quite frankly. I mean, certainly we need to tackle the issue. We need to deal with the problem. We need to do all that we can, but I do not, again, it's an incentive structure. What possible incentive is there for this current government to reform the electoral process? What possible benefit is there to them? It's like asking the guy in the fight to give me one of your swords and say, okay, well, put one of your swords down voluntarily. Who's going to do that? And so there is no incentives for this current government to do anything about the electoral reform, and they will drag this out as long as possible. In fact, Byron's report will probably come out close to the elections, which he'll probably call in next year and a half here, and then he'll drag it out, and it'll just be a farce. So there really, to me, is no real big push on this electoral reform thing. We've talked it to death. If we want legislation, I agree, will have some impacts. We do need to think about legislative approaches, but it will not be implemented by this government. It's impossible. Not only we don't have to tinker around the edges only, though, of the electoral laws and so forth. We have to rethink this thing fundamentally, because when the Constitution and those rules and laws were passed at independence, we were not thinking very creatively or forward thinking. These were simply adopted sort of colonial legacy rules. A lot of these rules are inappropriate. A lot of our legislation is inappropriate or inadequate for a small island developing state where you have twice your population or a significant portion of your population living overseas and can swing the vote at every election. We have to deal with the reality of those sort of peculiar situations that we find ourselves in as a microstate. So we need to pass legislations that are appropriate to microstates. Things like, well, if you live overseas for a certain amount of years, certainly you are Dominican, you're entitled to some sort of electoral discussion, but we will set up, constituencies overseas, and you elect one or two folks and you get to participate, but it cannot be that it is acceptable simply because the laws from back in the day, not thinking, forward thinking and creatively says, well, it's okay, you can come back every 5 years. And no, that will not work for a microstate. And unless we tackle those fundamental conceptual problems and rethink who we are as a nation and be creative and be willing to dump and move on and believe that we have the confidence as Black folk to define our own destinies and our own governments and our own styles of leadership for things that work. We don't have to hang on to those colonial legacies and be afraid to tackle them boldly. And so that's where I come from in this issue of electoral reform. Let's do what we can. Let's keep talking about the issue, but I don't see a lot of hope there for this government to do anything about it. And when we do something about it, we have to reimagine our communities and reimagine what a small island state should be governed like so that we can have a fair, equitable society. On the issue of, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Bernard, you go right ahead.
Well, I say, and finally, on the issue of fairness, unity, I believe we do need this. Clearly, we need unity. But beyond the talk of unity, I think we have to talk about the operational apparatus that allows unity. I think we have to put a lot of weight on how do we structure and organize ourselves to get unity as an outcome. Unity, not simply unity as a goal, an aspiration, but I think we need to work on the process. What do we put in place so that unity is an outcome rather than a goal or an aspiration? Now I'll stop there.
All right, excellent. You know, I like the last part that you mentioned. How do we structure ourselves in order to engage so that we create that framework for unity? I think that is something that is well worth looking at, because certainly the end goal has to be to unite the country, because the Barbadians found that all of the opposition forces had to get together, and they did, and they're hoping to fight an election together. Because they realized that they could not do it each by themselves. All they're doing is going to be splitting votes and splitting here and spinning top in mud, really. So I think they're doing that. I think it's a good thing to do. On the whole question of the electoral reform, I would say that I hope that the exercise that NJAM would embark on, which is a question of creating this new draft, this new legislation, would be modern legislation. If you look at Jamaica's model and so on, that would take all of that into consideration and create the modern laws that prevent the question of corruption and big money and so on in politics. But the rest of it, if you go well beyond that, you have to look at your constitution and to see what elements of our constitution we need to modernize. Because as you said, we did inherit a constitution which may not necessarily have been what we would have wanted today. Because obviously the constitution that we have is putting a lot of power into the hands of one person. What a constitution does today is to allow the executive branch to also be the legislative branch. So to de facto, you don't have the three separations, because the executive branch is in fact the legislative, because they have the majority. And you have 19 ministers in cabinet, for example, and then you have a few other senators. And you go to a parliament, there's so many people, you have the eyes always have it. So you have the majority there. So it's obvious, and we will speak to Mr. Linton about that when we come to it. But I believe the question of unity is a must if we're going to go forward. And I'm certainly hoping that the legislation, the draft legislation that comes out for electoral reforms and campaign reforms will be modern laws, right? Will take us out of the colonial era until we'll have free and fair elections and so on and so on. Level the playing field. But Thompson, as I go over to you there, I really want to go to you with two things there. Because based on all of the discussion we've had, I want to go back on this unity thing again, because you can see how important that is in order to get results, whether it's on electoral reform and campaign finance reform, or results in an election where you have an a level playing field. It seems to me you're still going to require that kind of unity of purpose. Then I want you to look first, if you can, Thompson, at the whole question of the economy of governance. Because it seems when I go look back on you have many leaders who have legacies, as you said. Each of them have left a legacy, from Frank Barron to our current Prime Minister, Mr. Skerrit. One of the other things that, you would probably be able to find some of those legacies as a historian, compare to those for Mr. Skerrit. And you did, in fact, said if Mr. Skerrit wants to have a legacy, the best thing for him to do is make sure we have free and fair elections. I agree with that. Now, Thompson, I also wanted you to, if you could, take a look at the whole question of, we have 19 cabinet ministers now. The Freedom Party had less, the ELP had less, Frank Barron, all these people before Liebel had less, Patrick had less. And yet, when we look at the cost of these governments, it's getting larger and larger every year. We keep going back for supplementary appropriations because everything that we decide to do, we fall in short, we overrun in our expenses, and we come back for more, always come, and not just a little bit more, for millions and millions, hundreds of $millions more. I want us to take a look at that to see if this is a real factor that we need to take into consideration. As a people, do we need to have big government that is costing us so much money? Can we go back to what we had before, where we had less government, but we're getting better results? So, Thompson, maybe you might want to speak to a couple of those things for us. I know we're having a little delay because Thompson is listening on via Facebook. So Thompson, you can go ahead whenever you're.
Yes, indeed, Sheridan. Thank you very much for this. And yes, thanks a lot. I think I am on now. You raised some very interesting points of discussion, and I want to start with the one dealing with unity. What I talked earlier about legacy and what the Prime Minister should be doing now as he begins his exit from the political stage. And one of the legacies, sadly, of this administration is that they have succeeded in tribalizing Dominican politics. What do I mean by this? I am on a continent where tribes are, and especially where I am in South Sudan, 63 tribes, every single tribal member's allegiance is first to the tribe before it is to the country. We're back on a process now of trying to make people understand that ultimately your country should be first. And it's an extremely difficult task. So what this government has succeeded in doing in Dominica has been able to create a divide between the red, the blue, and the green, so that people feel quite comfortable in defending their tribe. They defend their color. So when a labor right speaks, he's not thinking of the interests of the country first. Because you would wonder, but why would people argue when, for example, Honorable Lennox Linton calls for the return of $4.2 billion? You would think that every single labor right would join in that cry. Because after all, if this money comes back into Dominica, it's going to benefit every single one of us. But you will not find that. Because to them, what comes first is their party and the preservation of the party before the country. And that, I believe, is where, when we talk about unity, we have to think hard, very hard about this. Because what this has succeeded in doing, and as Bernard said, it has allowed this government to continue its rule with that type of divisiveness. But at the end of the day, it's at the sacrifice of the country in Dominica. So how do we reverse this? People need to begin to have the mindset of country first. That, hey, yeah, Pal Rep, I love you, but I love my country more than I love you. I love myself even more than I love you. And that's the kind of conversation I believe more that we need to have. It is one thing, yes, the opposition itself needs to unite around a single theme, but people need to be focused. And I think we are at a very critical crossroads now in Dominica. We are at the point where we have been going down a particular road. We have been going down a road of poverty, a road of high unemployment, a road of malgovernance, a road of corruption, a road of self-centeredness, a road of tribalism. And we now have to get to the point and ask ourselves, is that what we deserve? Is that what as Dominicans we want for ourselves? And if we can truthfully answer that question, if we can somehow remove ourselves from this bind or from those chains that bind us to think along political lines and begin to think of the country, where do we want to see the country going? If we look around us, the Dominicans, who within Dominica can move the country on a path to prosperity? Who are the people within Dominica that can be selfless in government, whose first claim to power will not be to remain in power indefinitely, but rather to help steer the country on a path of prosperity that all shall in fact eat? These are the kinds of questions that we need to be asking ourselves. So yes, we need to be unified, but we need to begin to break the chains that are so tribalized Dominica, that we are now put into different log boxes. We are put into different, pieces, different sets. And within the opposition, we need to begin to speak with one voice. So the efforts of the Freedom Party, United Workers' Party, of any other party that exists now in Dominica, of NJAM, or the civic groups, we must find a way to work together and to speak with one voice. And this one voice we're going to speak with is a voice of reason, is a voice that says, yes, we are going down the wrong path, and we need to redirect our direction. We need to change course. And that's the oneness of the voice we want. Yes, we will have differences in terms of how we get to that point that we want to get to, but we need to together work on doing this. And that is where, Sheridan, I would like for us to focus in the coming months. That unity of purpose, that belief that, it's not just about my party, it's not just about blue, it's not just about red, it's not just about green. It is about Dominica. What best do we want for Dominica? After 20 years of one government, isn't the better thing to try something else, to try another government, to bring in new faces? You talked about the bloated size of government, 19. We don't need 19 ministers, especially in a situation where you have the Prime Minister talking for his 19 ministers, and he makes no bones about it. The Prime Minister talks on behalf of the Health Minister. He talks on behalf of the Agriculture Minister. He talks on behalf of of all of these ministers. Allow people at independence to do their work. Allow them to, that freedom to operate where they have been called to operate. So I think Sheridan, going forward, we have to seriously consider that. We have to seriously consider working together. You talk about the splitting of the votes. I think ultimately what we're going to find, what will have to happen, as I said, is that some Laborites, our dear friends within the Labour Party, will have to understand that for their own personal development, for the development of their children, a development that will see a focus, for example, on agriculture, a development that will see a focus on manufacturing, a development that will see a focus on tourism, a development that will see a focus on quality education, on a quality health system. All of these development that must take place in Dominica, that will develop our own natural resources, develop our geothermal potential, develop our solar potential, our wave potential, all of this renewable energy potential that exists within Dominica. A focus on this. Bernard made a very critical point earlier. He says it's not that the government is not competent necessarily, but they've deliberately ignored these developments. Honorable Lennox Linton talked about the engines that trigger growth, and we've found a way somehow to bypass this. But if we now have a focus on those areas, a focus on development, a focus on people development, so that people understand that they belong to a country that is unified, that you have a system that is a meritocracy. What I mean by this big word, it's that people, they get positions based on merit. They get, persons who, for example, are working in different organizations for many years, they benefit from the experience, they get promoted as a result. That you don't get promoted based upon your political affiliation, but rather on your ability to do the work. That's the kind of society that I'm thinking about. That's the kind of society, that's the kind of vision I have for Dominica, for 70,000 people working in concert that can build a quality of life, that can build a country that is the envy of the rest of the world. I mean, we've wasted time, Sheridan, we've wasted time pulling each other down, being so blinded within the confines of our party that we've neglected Dominica in the process. And I think now is the time, as we begin in this new year, it's an ideal opportunity to focus on what we can do to promote Dominica. And let us look around us. Let's look at the competencies around us. And let us latch onto those competencies that will allow Dominica to become the envy of the world. And I believe, Sheridan, that this is possible. I believe we can have a country that is the envy of the rest of the world, where people work together, where we have a meritocracy system, where we have a health system that's banned in the Caribbean, an education system that will, for example, champion not only English, but the use of French. We are a bilingual society. There is so much waiting to be done. There is so much that needs to be done. But we cannot get there if we continue to see ourselves simply as a Labourite, simply as a UWPite, simply as a Freedomite. Now is the time, I believe, and I'm sending this call out to begin a discussion of how we can work together. We've heard, for example, and we've seen and I'll end with this. We've seen, for example, in terms of that divisiveness that I talk about, we've seen police officers who, for no rhyme or reason, are prepared to go after people who do not support the government. And then you have people talking about retaliation. Hey, I'll retaliate against your family if you harm me or if you harm my friends. I mean, why are we going down this path? What benefit is it to us? Have we suffered enough? Isn't enough people trapped in poverty enough? Can we do better? And I think that is what we need to begin to focus on. Sadly, we've had, as I said, very bad governance in these past years. By all accounts, this government has failed in governance. It has failed to unite the people, but I believe we can take a different track. We can go in a different direction, a direction that will see growth, a direction that will see prosperity, but above all, a direction that will see a unified Dominica, one where we do not care who you vote for. We look at you first as a Dominican.
Yes, Thompson, and thanks a lot for that. I think I've been hearing more or less the same thing here coming from Bernard as well. But Bernard is saying let's create the structure, the framework within which those discussions can take place that would lead to that kind of space where you can create that sort of unity. I don't think there's anybody saying that unity of purpose is not a good thing. I think I hear everybody saying that is a good thing. The question is to get the action done so that we can bring people together in a space in which that can happen. We're going to take some calls as we go along, because I know that Lambi will want to take a few calls. So Lambi?
Yes, absolutely, Sheridan. It is a...
Yes, Thompson, go ahead. I don't know whether Thompson, I know you have a delay because of the, because of you using Facebook to hear us, but so that's okay. So let me just go over to opposition leader Lennox Linton, and I was just letting Lambie know that make us a signal if he, if there's calls that's coming that he would like to take. But after Lennox, I would like to maybe go over to Lambie, so we could take a few calls before we go back to Kent. So Lennox, so we're at the point where we're talking about unity, we're talking about this bloated government sizes, and you're not getting the sort of returns on that investment in this big government. And it seems maybe so unnecessary to have such a large government, because other administrations have done it before without having that many people in the cabinet, and yet they've got results. But the questions that I'm seeing coming up here, so do you believe, for example, as in terms of yourself as a leader of the party that commands the greatest amount of supporters in the country at this time, based on the results of the last two elections? The last election, I believe, you can give me a correct figure, I believe the United Workers' Party got something like maybe in the region of about 15,000 votes or something like that. You'll give me the right figure when you come on. But the question is, do you believe a united opposition front is necessary at this point in order to defeat the incumbent? And I prepared, for example, to give priority, just like Thompson and Bernard is saying, priority to the interests of the country, protection of democracy, preservation of our constitution, and looking after people's interests first, ahead of party, ahead, personal ambition and so on. The same thing goes for every leader around, no matter which sector that you're in. Is everybody prepared to do that and just put country first, like Thompson is recommending, and to stand behind whoever is coming out as the person who can really get this done? As I said, the UWP has a major base to start with. Is that base can be used to create that space to allow everybody to participate in a way that can bring the kind of results that Thompson is talking about, and so, it's very important for us to look at this, because, if you're talking about the interest of coming together in one voice to fight this crucial, essential interest, to me, it's important to do that, because the kind of leadership you require in that space would have to be able to mobilize, to engage, to galvanize those people to come together to stand for things. Because when we talk, for example, about action, let us say on electoral reform, let us say you were to, and JAM were to come up with the draft laws for electoral and campaign finance reform, and let us say draft laws for public accounts, a public accounts law. How do we get everybody to come behind that, so that when people are called out, everybody comes out rather than 6 people coming out, and then instead of each person trying to raise funds, can everybody get together and try to raise funds? Because this regime obviously has access for largesse, so that they have a big war chest wherever the money is coming from, and your millions being spent in elections. It seems to me if all of the opposition groups were together, instead of each one trying to raise funds individually, it probably might be best to try to raise funds as one group. Lennox, let me go over to you and you give me your thoughts on some of those things and any other thing that you have in mind to talk about.
Thank you, Sheridan. There's always a lot to give your thoughts on when you speak after Sheridan Gregoire has spoken, Mr. G. And I hope I am keeping track of some of the important points that you've raised. But let me say that when we talk about unity, keep in mind that the people of Dominica are united, whether they like it or not, whether they recognize it or not. We are united in increasing dependency. We're united in increasing poverty. We're united in increasing joblessness. We're united in increasing underemployment. We're united in victimization of people who don't share the political perspective or support the ruling party in Dominica. So for many Dominicans across the board, they are united under what is not going right for them, but failing at the same time to unite around what must go or should or ought to be going right for them. Now, I always get concerned when this matter of electoral reform comes up, and we seem to forget that what we're talking about is fundamentally the people's right in a democracy to elect government of the people by the people, for the people, as a very important starting point for the success of the democracy and the parliamentary democracy that we speak about. Because what is happening under our watch right now in Dominica, we have watched for a few election cycles now. One man and his political party deciding that it is not the people in their majority vote that is going to decide who runs government. It is us who have the reins of government and will ensure, through any means, fair or foul, that we remain in office. Which is the reason why in the laws of Dominica, you have provisions against bribery, against cheating, against impersonation. And there are clear guidelines set up as to how elections should be run. This party in office now since 2000 has rigged elections successfully, every cycle with greater success at every opportunity. And the people stand back and watch. Because one of the most distressing things that is happening to Dominica is this belief that because you are the one, or it is your group or organization that is talking about it, it is your responsibility and your responsibility alone to fix something that is affecting all of the people and their chances for peaceful, safe living in the nature island that God blessed us with. So it is not easy to hear that electoral reform is some kind of red herring. I hope I got Bernard Ito wrong on that point. But I was hearing the use of the term red herring and electoral reform in the same sentence. And I'm wondering, well, what is this? Almost as though, yeah, it is something that we can talk about, but we can do other things, right? And the point, to Bernard's point now, about there being no incentive to develop an economically empowered value society of prosperous, independent people. I don't know where that exists. But what I will say is that while there's no incentive, the government, the ruling party has no right to be standing in the way of people moving on their own initiative to develop that economically empowered society of prosperous and independent people. And what you have, why the situation in Dominica today is so distressing, is that the government and the government's policies are actually standing in the way of people and sectors from moving forward so that they can maintain their hold on power, so that they can continue to rape and plunder the resources of the country. And at some point in time, hear me well, we have to come to the understanding, the entire nation state of Dominica has to come to the understanding that it is them that the government represents. Whether the government got in there by fair or foul means, it is them that the government represents. And regardless of what rule of law structures you have that may or may not be inadequate, at the end of the day, it is the responsibility of the people, especially those who are being oppressed, to take matters into their own hands and decide this kind of governance is not good for us. We don't want it anymore. This is where it stops. A government was stormed out of office in Dominica for much less than what we've seen happening today, you know. Much, much, much less than what we see happening today. It has never been the situation before in the history of Dominica that one small clique of people so effectively commandeered billions of dollars belonging to the people of Dominica who are sinking deeper and deeper into poverty, while we find all sorts of excuses why we should stand aside and continue to look. And Kent, my brother, I listened to you and I was attentive when I was listening to the story about the customer service intervention that this gentleman made on behalf of his business. Because I was looking for how we connect that wonderful experience to what is in front of us and whether there is something, some example that we can follow up on, that we can use Similar to how the guy got his thing going and he's pursuing excellence and it's working for him. What thing of similarity can we be doing in this current political environment to move us out of where we are today? Because you see, it is working, what is happening to Dominica is working well for those who are making it happen to Dominica. It is not working for those to whom it is happening. And it's to whom it is happening, to those whom it is happening, that must stand up and must do something about it. I'm on this question too of the size of cabinet. You know the interesting thing about that, gentlemen? Dominica set the tone some years ago with its 18 ministers of cabinet. And everybody around Dominica seemed to be following suit right now. Huh? There was a time when the other countries had 9 and 10 ministers of government. All of the numbers are rising now. St. Lucia, 15. Antigua used to be 7 or 8, now 13 and growing. St. Kitts, 9. Grenada, 17, one less than Dominica. It began here, but everybody else is saying, oh, well, look at little Dominica. The economy is nowhere near the size of ours. We have bigger GDPs than them. They have bigger government than us. So everybody's trying now to be like Dominica in terms of the numbers and giving jobs to the boys, which is another matter completely. But on the question of electoral reform, one of my disappointments is that the Electoral Commission that has the mandate to conduct a free and fair elections in Dominica has sat aside since the election of 2019, and we're coming now into 2022, which is 2+ years have gone by, and basically have done nothing about electoral reform that we had a big issue with before the 2019 election. And the Electoral Commission now seems to be waiting on the report of Sir Dennis Byron rather than moving ahead with its agenda on behalf of the people of Dominica. So it would appear that there's some understanding between the Electoral Commission and Sir Dennis Byron that it makes sense to wait for his report, and they will implement the recommendations from his report. Those recommendations have to be scrutinized by we the people, because we expect that the eminent jurist that he is, Sir Dennis, will in fact do justice to the assignment that he was given and present something that will work and work well, if implemented properly, will work well for the people of Dominica in terms of what we need in electoral reform. And this electoral reform really, from our point of view, is intended, has to be focused on restoring the right of the people of Dominica to elect a government of the people of Dominica, by the people of Dominica, for the people of Dominica. It must be directed at removing from the hands of a few people in the current administration the right to decide, no, you people no longer have that right. We will decide for you who your government is, and that government is always going to be us. And we'll do so with bribery. We'll do so with treating. We'll do so with manipulation of the overseas vote. We'll do so with all sorts of irregularities and illegalities that we can come up with, because the best you can do is to take us to court. And when we go to court, you can do what you want. You can get to the CCJ if you wish, and the CCJ can give you a ruling that you're right, that our members should probably be before the court for criminal conduct in the elections. We still have a director of public prosecutions under our control that we can direct to kick the case out of the criminal court. I need Dominicans to understand what the significance of all that is. The significance of the power and authority that this government is brutally exercising over the democratic rights and freedoms and the sacred responsibility of electing their own government, that this government is riding roughshod over. Because look at Thompson Fontaine. He is in South Sudan. when he shows up here to Dominica, the land of his birth, the police will most likely be at Melville Hall waiting to arrest him and to bring him to the court on a bogus charge of incitement. I, Lennox Linton, am in the courts as well on a bogus charge of incitement. We're talking unity here. We're talking unity. I'm before the court on a bogus charge of incitement. Since September of 2018, for an incident that happened in Roseau on the 7th of February 2017, almost 5 years ago. The charge is incitement. There are over 70 witness statements in that matter against me, none of which connect me in any way, shape, or form to any statement of incitement. But in the mind of Roosevelt Skerritt, and in the minds of the $1 million lawyers that he has retained from Trinidad to fight and persecute me in the courts in Dominica, there was incitement. So the matter began. The magistrate that was hearing it moved on. It starts again under a new magistrate, and life goes on. The people of Dominica are sitting by thinking, well, oh, it's Lennox Linton, one man. Let's Skerritt and them do what they want with him in the court. Oh, it's Thompson Fontaine. He has a job in South Sudan. He's not even down here. What does it matter? What do we care? And for as long as we're prepared to think like that, for as long as we're prepared to think, oh yeah, we can unite, but it is us they're doing it to, it's them they're doing it to, not us. So we're not in that. Some fellas get arrested. Some fellas get brutalized by the police. Some people's right to
I want to interject you a little bit and engage with you for a moment there, Lennox, because I'm not so worried about Thompson Fontaine. I suspect that Thompson Fontaine, one of those days, is going to arrive in the airport in Dominica, be prepared to get arrested, and become a hero. Because it will be a bogus charge. It's not going to stand. It's going to be prolonged and whatnot. But one of those days, Thompson Fontaine is probably going to arrive and get arrested, knowing he's going to get arrested and then fight for the people if he can. Right? Now, here's the thing though, Lennox. I think Bernard Ito, and we all made a point, you need a space in which people can get together, a structure, a framework. You mentioned 1979. What I recall about 1979, that structure, that framework, that space was there, that commonality of purpose to get a job done. So this thing was created, right? And people came together and said, this is what my interest is. We all have an interest, so let's all get together. Let's put our foot down. Nothing is going to work until we get what we want. That is what happened in 1979. I think the question that's coming up on the table here again is, are all of the leaders in Dominica, like those people in 79, prepared to come together, have the discussion, and create that space, that structure, that framework within that dialogue can take place, and then agree as one voice. As one voice, say, listen, we got to move forward because we can no longer tolerate this, where we cannot have free and fair elections. People are victimized when they speak. Thompson Fontaine, he cannot come to his country. Don't want that to happen anymore. So, Lennox, what are your thoughts on creating that kind of space, that framework within which not just political parties, but all of the groups in the society and the interest groups can come together and do that?
Well, that's absolutely necessary, Sheridan, because the responsibility for change in Dominica is not a responsibility for a single political party, a single individual, or any group of individuals. It is a responsibility for political parties, civic-minded organizations, people who believe, know in their heart, the Christians of good conscience, who know that what is happening in Dominica in terms of governance is not working for the people of Dominica, and it needs to change. There has to be a way that we work effectively together in a unified way. We work effectively together to get the change that the country needs, that our country and our people need. So that's the challenge before us. I'm one of those who believe that even when you are in government, perhaps even more so, you have to find ways, creative, effective ways of working with the different sectors of society. The business sector, the civil society organizations, the leaders of church, etc. It's important that we find ways to connect with them and to work with them for the good of the country. We have seen less and less of that happening over the last 20 years, and more a divide and rule sort of posturing from the ruling party that says, okay, if I have this one in that corner, I push that one in that corner over there, I will rule the roost. And we, the people now, must defend against that as effectively as we can. So yes, Sheridan, there is a space, there is a time for togetherness within the forces of right action, within the forces of good conscience in Dominica now, that know and understand that what is happening and passing for governance in this country is not working for Dominica, and it is leading us down a road that we will regret more and more we have gone down. So how do you do that? That's a challenge before us, and I'm hoping 2022 is the year in which we make much more strides as political parties, as civil society organizations, in working more effectively together and pursuing that commonality of purpose that will lead us to the change that Dominica needs. I am firmly behind that and of the view. And I'm also saying when any political party gets into government, you cannot forget the civil society organizations. You cannot forget the organizations representing the various sectors of the economy. You have to create a space in which your governance includes them for the benefit of all the people of Dominica.
See, I just want to open up the conversation. Now, anybody can jump in because we have so many things on the floor. The question is, who is going to really, in other words, things do not happen by themselves. People have to make up their minds, listen, we are going to intentionally work towards creating that space, creating that structure where we can come together, dialogue, and take some real decisions about going forward together, because we keep talking about doing things together, and it works. It has worked before. It will work again. It always works when people come together with a common interest. Everybody does not have to be thinking alike, but the point is there has to be some target, some main objective, some main common interest, which, for example, like around your constitution, around your democracy, around elevating people's lives and making people's living, the quality of life and living standards better, elevating your economy. There have to be some common purposes. This whole question of free and fair elections, who does not want free and fair elections? So the point is, somebody or people have to decide, listen, you know something, let's take the initiative, let's get together, let us discuss. I'm just throwing this out to anybody around the table.
Well, let me jump in here. I think that's a good place to jump in. Right. So, but that's exactly the point you just raised, Sheridan, what NJAM is all about. And we have several subcommittees, but one of the subcommittees that we have, and we'll soon jump into action, we have a meeting tomorrow actually, is one called the Political Activation Subcommittee. That is the committee that will make recommendations to the NJAM overall committee concerning exactly what we're talking about, creating that space, recommendations about the process through which we come together to take the kinds of actions we need to take to save Dominica. So that's on the cards, and there are good people who are volunteering their times and giving their efforts towards that. But that's a must, because as Thompson rightly said, we have to think Dominica first. And we have to change attitudes, and we have to change mindsets, and we have to convert many persons to the right side. But talking about converting many persons to the right side, I am very encouraged to know. Don't forget where we started from. If we were to go back to the last election, there was already a majority of Dominicans that rejected the current government. the reason why the current government won appears to be, and not appears to be, we all know it, because there was massive bribery, massive fraud. We all know it. So we are at a good place. If it wasn't for persons being bought and being flown in to vote in the election, it would have been a different result. So I am saying Dominicans have already shown that we do not want to continue with bad governance. They have already shown that. But we need to convert even more persons to show that. And then secondly, as I go around, I am beginning to find more and more, and Thompson, you spoke about it should not just be, we should drop our the red and the blue and the green, and we should think Dominica first, and I fully agree with you. But you know what's happening as I go around? I'm finding persons of who were labor rights or still are labor rights or who were labor rights who are beginning, their eyes are opening and people are beginning to say, no, this is not right. This is not good. So guess what? We started from the point where there was already a majority, maybe not a huge majority, but a majority that already rejected the current bad governance that we have. We are adding to those numbers. People increasingly are beginning to realize what's going on is not right. So they're coming off this party first thing and they're coming into Dominica first thing. And that's beginning to happen. So we've got to fuel it. We have got to do more. So going back to the point Lennox was asking, what's the point of the illustration that I raised? And but this is exactly the point. The point is that we have spoken and we have made noise, so to speak. Rightly so, we have complained. Rightly so, but we do not seem to have a government that's listening to our complaints and our noise. So we've got to figure out how do we rise above that noise? How do we not just speak about it? How do we not just complain about it? Because we're not getting actions. Any reasonable government, any government that has integrity, any government that's not bent on maintaining power at any cost, any government that's not bent on doing that would listen to the people and would adjust accordingly, would go through the electoral reform. But they do not seem to want to do it. And I think what Bernard was saying is that there is no incentive to them because they want to maintain power. And anytime they do something different, they know that people have already rejected them. So electoral reform means clearly they will go out. So there is no incentive for them to do it. So when we recognize that, we have to rise above just complaining, and we've got to get into action. Now, you begin to ask what kind of action? Well, we mentioned some of it already. Well, first, let's begin to give them no excuse for saying there is no law drafted, reasonable drafted. Let's begin to give them. That's what Mackenzie has been talking about. But that's just the beginning point. We've got to go further than that. And as a people, and these are discussions, when we set up the mechanism for discussion with civic society, with the trade unions, with faith-based organizations, we'll come up with the kinds of steps and discuss our suggestions with them as to the kinds of things we need to do. But what Mackenzie mentioned is just a first step. This is not just a step to put forward there and keep talking. This is a step to put forward there and rise above just the complaining, just the talking, and begin to demand the kind of actions. People hear me. Unless we take the kinds of actions, because we have a government that's not listening to just our complaints, unless we begin to rise and think of what's the right kinds of strategies we need to exercise to get action, is not going to happen. And that is what NJAM wants to do, to organize. But that's just one area. There are other areas. What a part of what is being done is economic terrorism against our people, victimization. Several of our speakers tonight have mentioned that. No. How do we deal with this? We can wait until the government changes and hope that we'll rise out of it. Or we can from now begin to say, you know something? We're going to bring our efforts together. We're going to dedicate our time, our resources, the little that we have, and put it together. And we are going to lift ourselves up so that we can create in people a mindset of independence, that we can begin to demonstrate to people that better can be done, even with the little that we have. We just need to begin to sow a seed in people's mind because they're sowing a different kinds of seed. So these are the kinds of actions we are talking about. But the mechanisms for getting those, NJAM will be sharing it as we go along. And Sheridan, go ahead. Sorry, you're muted, Sheridan.
Yeah, sorry about that. Here's the thing. I've been listening to you. I've been listening to Dr. Thompson Fontaine. I'm listening to Bernard, and I'm listening to the opposition leader, Sir Lennox Linton. I'm hearing us saying the same thing. Here's what I think we need to do, because if you want to get action, you have to go into an implementation mode. You see, you cannot be talking all the time. At some point, you have to go into implementation mode. And what I hear Bernard saying, create that framework. Create that structure, create that space so you can come in there with all the ideas and be committed. Okay, here's what we want to achieve. I mentioned 1979. Why? That is what happened. That's it. That is exactly what happened. The private sector, the churches, everybody, the unions, everybody came together and decided, you know something, we are creating this space. They called it at that time the Committee for National Salvation. That was what they called that structure that Bernard is talking about. Create that space, people sit around a table and they say, listen, I may have this, that interest. Everybody has an interest, but we have realized that we cannot realize our interest unless we come together and we have enough clout, enough numbers, enough force to be reckoned with. Let me just give you a scenario, Kent. In terms of implementing some of the things that Bernard is saying and Njam is saying and Dr. Thompson Fontaine and Son and Lennox is saying, can you imagine if, for example, you create a forum where the truckers, the heavy equipment operators, the contractors, the bus drivers, the unions, the religious groups, civil society, all the little groups around the place, if they were all to come together and say, listen, you know something, we need to get this result. We need to get this electoral reform. We want to stand behind this draft legislation. We want to get, you know, this reform in the parliament, this law to ensure that the Public Accounts Committee can function so there can be, you know, accountability there in governance. We want to ensure that these no-bid contracts end, and we're going to follow the procurement laws, and that the local, and then when our government goes and negotiates, they can ensure that our local contractors and local people get a certain percentage of the work. If, in other words, I'm saying if all the various interests came together, and if the union said, well, you know something, why should we settle for 1% and 1% or 0 for 14 years? When cabinet may have given themselves 60% increase some time ago. In fact, when we look at the whole question of the cost of living, Thompson, we find, I mean, the situation now has changed so much. I mean, how much is a thing of a loaf of bread compared to what it was maybe 10, 12 years ago? It's much higher now. In other words, everything is going up. The cost of living has gone up. And people are having a rough time making ends meet. So the question is, having talked about all of this, can we find this space and find people coming together and have a meeting of the mind? And out of that will evolve some kind of leadership material that, you know, that is going to be able to move the process forward, because that is how people meet in groups, and leadership comes out of that, moves the process forward to implementation of action. Because what if all these groups that I'm talking about, including truckers, including bus drivers and so on, if they decided, you know something, this law, this draft laws, let us stand behind all of us. And if these people do not want to do the right thing, we're going to take some action. We're going to create some disruption, right?
You know, Sheridan.
Yeah.
Sheridan, you know, I'm glad you bring this up, and I'm also even happier that you raised it in a historical context. You know, let's not forget that Dominica is a nation of Nagmawon. We are descendants of the Nagmawon who resisted, who rebelled against slavery. We are descendants of those who resisted and rebelled in 1979, and it can happen again. And that's the reason why at the very outset, I couched my presentation with regards to the legacy. You see, because the yearning for electoral reform is so strong, the desire for change in Dominica is so strong that it will come. The question becomes, how do we get there? And that's why I made an appeal, a special appeal at the outset of this program to the Prime Minister, to guard his legacy. Let us take the peaceful path. But I can guarantee you, if the peaceful path is not forthcoming, the people will stand. The people will take to the streets. It has happened before. It will happen again. Personally, I would prefer that we don't go down the path of violence and destruction. But it's either or. We are going to get electoral reform one way or the other. Either the Prime Minister rises to the occasion and allows the electoral reform process to go forward, or the people take matters into their own hands. These are the only two choices we have. These are the only two choices that we have. There is no third way. It's either we get it legally, we get it the way it is meant to be, or the people take matters into their own hands. And that point is going to come. It's going to happen. As clear as we're going to have a sunrise tomorrow morning, we, the people of Dominica, are going to take to the streets. They're going to take the actions that will guarantee our democracy for the next 50, 60 years.
All right, let me just.
Bernard,
so-
let me get
Oh,
some,
go ahead, Sheridan.
let me get some thoughts on Bernard now on some of these.
Yeah, well, just briefly to address Lennox. I mean, Lennox, you had a good point in terms of the issue of electoral reform being critical, or democracy, the process of democracy being very, very important. I hope you didn't misunderstand me and think that I didn't think that reformation of that process is important to our democracy and fundamental. I do not believe at all that it's irrelevant. It's foundational. The point I'm making, though, is our approach to electoral reform. We have to rethink that, because we have been appealing to the government and thinking somehow that these guys are going to be interested in electoral reform, and that we talk to them and talk at them, and somehow that electoral reform is going to happen. I think that strategy is not a good one. It's not very fruitful. We have to do true electoral reform by being on the ground, understanding where the people are coming in to vote, doing the analytics, understanding, have people on the ground in the villages who understand what a clean voters list look like, working on the voters list ourselves, making that clean, insisting that it matches what's going on the ground, do our thing. But to talk to this government about electoral reform and to depend on them and think that somehow having an intellectual conversation with them or a reasonable conversation with them of implementing electoral reform, I think is not, has been shown for the past decade to be misplaced. So don't get me wrong. I am not talking about the fact that electoral reform is not important. It is very important, and the things that you say and the things that we talk about as opposition to the public is very educational and necessary. But I think beyond that, we have to create effective, on the ground actions. And I am so in favor of electoral reform that I'm thinking we have to revamp our laws, if parts of our constitutions, in how we govern microstates. So I am not at all about not being in that orientation. It's simply how we have to think about it, in my opinion. Now, on the issue of how do we move forward united, how do we, create a process? One of the things, gentlemen, we must do is we must realize that life is a narrative. We have to tell the better story. Unless we tell the better story in an interesting way that people are willing to listen to and be moved emotionally to action, then we will not get the sort of break over that what we're thinking about. We have to tell the better story. We have to tell the more engaging story. We have to tell the more emotionally appealing story, and that is what we have to do. This is what we need to come together as various groups and craft that story and craft that emotional appeal. And then we have to use strategic thinking, because the art of strategy is to focus your resources on a few key points so you can break through the enemy lines. If you spread your resources broadly, you're not going to have any real impact. But you need to say, this is the weak link right here, and we're going to put all our resources, all our thoughts, all our strategies, all our joint activities on that one link. And that is the way you change the battlefield. It's the art of strategy. You change the battlefield. You don't play on the opposition's battlefield. You don't play on the enemy's battlefield. You change the topography within which we operate. And that's what we need to get together and think through. How do we change the battleground? How do we change the conversation in a way that is to our advantage? How do we focus on 2 or 3 things? Because we can't do everything. So, and as I've said this in NJAM meetings, we need to think 2 or 3 things that we agree upon, because there will be many things we do not. A few things we agree upon, and put all our joint resources on those things and focus on those things and put the structures, the organizational processes and so forth, so that we can in fact get through the line 1 or 2 places. And that is how you create the narrative and the emotional appeal to people. We simply have to excite people about the possibilities. We have to create a vision that is more powerful than the vision they have now. Because at the end of the day, we are emotional narrative creatures, not logical, not appeal to the logic and the constitution, but we are emotional people who want a good narrative. And we have to tell a better narrative that Dominica can be that shining city on the hill that we always wanted, but it's been prevented by some people who are not aligned with our joint community aspirations. And that's the story we have to tell.
Yeah,
so it's not just about the numbers. We have to find a way to tell people the better story.
Yeah. Let me just say this, Kent. I can see you want to say something.
Yeah.
And I know that Lennox has something you want to say too. I want to keep it simple, Bernard. Here's how I've known it has happened. In 1979, and I'm trying to give an example to keep it simple. There was a man called Louis Benoit. His name was Zaboka. That's how we called him, Zaboka. There's a guy called Curtis Augustus and guys called Ali Gage on Sunday in the waterfront and Island Route and Union. When the guys got together with everybody else, including the public service, who was under Mr. Charles Savary at the time, and all the church organizations and the Chamber of Commerce, Employers Federation, all of those groups, all the NGOs and so on, and they got together, they decided, listen, we have a common purpose. We're going to get this done. So every group had different interests, just like the truckers will have a different interest. You have equipment people, the contractors, everybody had different interests. So when Mr. Charles Savary said, we want 131% increase for the public servants, everybody else went along and supported them, including the opposition leader, Mary Eugenia Charles, who she knew if her government got in, she would have to pay it, the increase. But she agreed. 100, and the people stood up. I think when Louis Benoit said, okay, and Ali, the port is not going to work because we're part of this group, the port not working. So they shut down the port. The country was closed. Business people close their business places at certain times or allow their staff time to participate in demonstration and things of that nature. This, you see, this is how this thing got done. If people have a common interest and they say, you know something, really, we want free and fair elections. So here is a draft law we think is good because the rest of the region is working that. The OAS agreed with that. The CARICOM agreed with that. These are the laws that are modern laws. We're going along. We're going to stand firm until we get that. The government may say, okay, let's modify this and so on. But the point is the people decided standing firm. And unless we get it, we're going to create some disruption. Life cannot be normal. That's what happened in 1979. Okay? And so I'm saying to you, Bernard, it is not a complicated formula. If people decide that they really want to get something done, they can make their demand on the people who they have employed to serve them, which is the government. You have voted for those people because you have employed them to provide certain services to you. If you find that you're not getting jobs as contractors, if you find that as heavy equipment operators, your equipment line idle is not working, if you find as the bus operators, there's all kind of thing going on, you're not getting stimulus. If you find that some people are getting free money to build big hotels, and everybody else is being told, go to the bank and borrow money, and you know you don't have collateral, what are you going to do? You haven't got collateral, you cannot get the money in a loan. Why isn't somebody saying, let us make sure that some of that free money goes down to the small man so that he too, you may not need $6 million. He may need $50,000. Even if you want to say, okay, well, give him a matching credit financing system. Maybe take a part loan, a part overdraft, and part grant. At least he gets going. He doesn't got to worry about all this collateral thing. Just make sure you help him with a good business plan. Help him to ensure he has a good marketing structure, right? And to me, if we were to do that, people have to just decide they're going to stand and to get a more equitable society. That's what it is. It's not that people are asking for anything outland. All you're asking for is free and fair elections. Isn't that reasonable? All you're asking for is an equal piece of the pie so that poverty is not going to become so entrenched, and you want to elevate your middle class, expand your middle class so more people can have a little taste of the wealth, they can pay their bills and get by. That's not too much to ask for. So I think if people were to get together, all sectors, to say, listen, you know something, we want to help our government to help us to improve our lives. That is what we're going to do. We're going to say to them, we want this. If we don't get that, we're going to stand firm. Nothing happens until we get it. That's what happened in 79. I'm just big. So Ken, I'm just reading that reference so you'll understand what I'm saying. You want to unmute your mic, Ken?
Yeah, Sheridan, thanks, because you actually said a lot of what was going through my mind. Because the truth is, this is not a difficult matter, and we are not trying to have a detailed discussion here in terms of the nitty-gritty of the strategy. Some of that will be dealt with in the discussions with civil society, political parties, and so on. But what you are suggesting, what you're saying is what we're saying. We are laying out the broad necessity. And the broad necessity is exactly this. It's not a difficult thing. The broad necessity is that we need everybody to stand together to save the country on this matter. And so it simply means we got to set up the foundation for doing that. And which is what we are putting the nation on notice on, that we are going to be speaking as an entity that takes onto itself the role of trying to coordinate that thing, that we're going to speak, as you rightly said, Sheridan, I'll just be repeating you, we'll be speaking to the faith-based organizations, we'll be speaking to the unions, we'll be speaking to the political parties, we'll be speaking to everyone who has an interest in saving the nation and standing together. So the examples you raise are ideal. We'll find those kinds of interests and those kinds of things on which we need action, and we will act together. And that is the foundation that we are laying, and we are very happy that people are responding to that since we have relaunched NJAM, and even before that. But since we have relaunched NJAM, people are responding to that, and they are seeing the necessity for that, and we are going to put it together. So very soon we'll embark on some of those discussions. But as you said, it is really not a difficult thing. The thing is, we just need to stand together. And I've heard Lennox, I've heard Thompson, I've heard Bernard. We all agreed that the people need to stand together. And what it is that we need to stand against? We need to stand against a government that will not do the right thing, a government that will ignore the laws where they can, a government that will use the police where they can. But when a people stand together, as happened in 79, and you know the history, Sheridan, I was very young then. And that's why we said in the NJAM press release that we're doing this in the spirit of the Committee for National Salvation. It's not we have some precedents. It's not a very difficult thing to do at all. So thanks, Sheridan, for putting that out there. But that's exactly what NJAM wants to put itself in that space to bring to the nation.
I want to take some calls, but I want to put something to the honorable opposition leader before I do that. And Lambi, you just stand by, because I'm going to ask you to take a few calls after. But Mr. Linton, I'm sure that your maths is much better than mine. And we're talking a lot of things. And well, Dr. Thompson Fountain is there. You can come to my rescue if you find I fall short in the mathematics. I had my school fees when I was going to school. But I can recall that the UWP have quite a few thousands of votes to bring to the table, Mr. Linton. When we talk about people getting together, I mean, it seems to me that we should be happy to come together in this forum with all these fine people, all these fine groups and organizations, and should be able to bring to the table, into the discussion, into the fold, a massive number of people. to mobilize those people and to help them to organize and so on, so that they can be a part of initiatives to make life better for the people of Dominica. Now, Mr. Linton, do you think that the UWP might be able to assist with that kind of initiative, considering that you have so many people behind you? The Freedom Party has people behind them, NJAM people, everybody has people. What can be done? I'm really looking for some commitments from people around the table first to get something done. The mic is yours, Mr. Linton.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand the question you're asking.
The question I'm asking is this. We're talking about everybody getting together, bringing something to the table. Yes, I think what NJAM can bring things to the table in trying to help to coordinate and so on, but I think what the United Workers' Party can bring to the table is a large following of people, right, that voted for the United Workers' Party, and the United Workers' Party, under its leadership, has that number of people. I think it's a matter of motivating its people to come together to support the causes that we're talking about. So it means that the public servants, under, let us say, the leadership of the DPSU, and the people who supported freedom under the leadership of Bernard and his executives, people who support NJAM, and all of the various groupings, if they were to come together and bring all of the assets, whatever they can bring, that is what we're looking for. And I think the United Workers' Party is one of the groups that has a lot of following there. That's what I was saying.
Yeah, well, Sheridan, to be clear, the United Workers' Party is totally, absolutely in favor of and committed to working with any and every organization in Dominica that wants a better Dominica. Insofar as it concerns NJAM, NJAM is not as new to us as the recent press release of NJAM. We have been in discussion over the past year or so with the founders of the movement, so to speak. And we have exchanged ideas on the structure and the focus of the movement going forward. And what you see happening now is as a result of certain revisions and certain decisions that were made as to the best way for this entity of civil society players to move forward into 2022 and the years beyond, playing a critical role in good governance of Dominica, in ensuring that democratic principles and policies prevail and that the people have a chance to participate in the governance of their country. They have a chance to feedback, and they have a chance to enjoy the opportunities that emerge from the build-out of their economy and the advancement of their society. So we are fully on board with any and every organization, whether they be political, whether they be civil society organizations, whether they be in the business sector, that knows that we are on the wrong track, accepts that, and is willing to work from their various stations in life for a better Dominica, which inevitably means, in terms of where we are right now, a change of government.
Well, yes, Lennox, I fully appreciate that commitment on your part and saying so publicly like this. And I want to also commend all the other members of the panel, including Dr. Thompson Fontaine, because sometimes you have to have people, you see, like Kent is talking about coordinating and unifying. We have to have people who can help to coordinate and to unify, because when you have several forces together, that's what happened in 79. You had to have people who could coordinate and help to unify the various groups to move forward with one common purpose. And I'm glad to see that some of that will be evolving. That is why I said people like Thompson Fontaine, Lennox, I have no fear for him, because I think Thompson, this guy is coming out of South Sudan.
There's a reason he's down there now.
This guy, he should be able to come to Dominica and let them arrest him, let everybody put up on their shoulder after they let him go 2 days later, and then let him become a hero if that's what they want to make of him. This is the point. That's what you do. That's what happened to Rosie Douglas. They put him in jail up there, and then he came down to Dominica and became prime minister. Yeah, you understand? So, but I want to take some calls before I go. So, Lambi, let's take some calls from the people, because I believe there might be people who want to join this conversation and and put a few questions. Give them the numbers and then just make sure we can hear you, Lambi. Over to you, Lambi.
This is the Global View and Q. The numbers are 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. And we're taking your calls right now on the Global View and Q. Again, those numbers, 449-3095, 96 and 97, 616-4257, 305-432-9624. We're taking your calls now as we pass the microphone back to Mr. G.
Yes, if you don't have any calls right away, Lambi, we could chat a little bit, and then when anybody is, you see as I start to talk, you have a call. Take it. Take the call, Lambi.
Good evening, caller. Thank you very much for joining us. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening to you all.
Good evening.
I feel satisfied based on what I'm hearing. This group of gentlemen that is in the house right now, yes, even if my mind was about to change, but trust me, I feel satisfied. This group of men, we are going to make a difference. Campbell locked in for difference.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I think 2022 is a good year for people to start taking a stand. Lambi, go ahead.
Overseas
Hello?
line? Go ahead, please.
Yes, this call is for Sheridan. I want to ask Sheridan Gregor whether he would support the call for taking the streets to, as Mr. Fountain suggested, whether he, Sheridan Gregor, would join in the call and in the cause, and would join also on the street if we have to do whatever we have to do to see that democracy is maintained.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Is that all, caller?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us. We'll get one more call. Good evening, caller. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening.
Could you speak louder, please?
Yes, good evening.
That's better.
Yeah, I was listening to the question by Mr. G on the issue of when he addressed Lennox minutes ago. What Mr. G is saying is that the United Workers' Party has a large following. In fact, in the last election, they got 41% of the votes. According to, of course, we know it was a rigged election. And the winning party got 59%. So that's a huge following. If that following could be brought together, from constituency to constituency, and I think Mr. G was doing was to lay the responsibility on the United Workers' Party to make a commitment that, listen, I'm going to garner those people, get them together for when that day comes for us to get together. And I think that would be a very, very good first step. And the other organizations would follow through with their smaller groups. But together we can get this done. Thank you.
Yes, and I think the word together is an important thing. It should not be left just to the United Workers' Party. It has to be done together. That is what happened in 79. Everybody got together, formed a space, created the forum, a structure, they discussed, and everybody moved together. Lambi, you want to take another call? Okay, so let us go long. I don't know, Lennox, Thompson, did you want to jump in and make a contribution at this point? I know we have a little delay because you're listening on Facebook.
You have someone on the telephone.
Oh, you have a telephone? Let's take the calls. This point.
Thanks for joining us, caller.
Yes, Sheridan. Sorry, as I said, I'm on a slight delay there. But definitely, when we, I believe what I'm hearing and what I've heard tonight and what I've been hearing all along is that people are concerned about their democracy.
Stand by, caller.
That people, not only are they concerned, but they are prepared to do something about it. And I think that is to me, is the more critical thing. The last time I checked, we were still in a democracy, which means we have the right to protest peacefully for what we desire, for our rights. And that is something that we will have to do. As I said, hopefully Ruger Scurry will do the right thing. Lennox talked about the commission. There was the time, I believe it was in 2019, in July of 2019, when we received, actually letters were sent out by the Electoral Commission where they were proposing to clean the voters list. So there was a time when they were prepared to do the right thing. The question is, what has happened to the Electoral Commission? And we need to hold feet to the fire. These are public servants who are supposed to be acting on behalf of the people and not on behalf of a particular party.
Let's point
So
out.
it's something that
Let's
can be
point
done
out there,
easily.
Thompson.
I think, this is something that we can do relatively easily, which is get a clean voters list, put the laws in place that will have campaign finance so that you don't have one party dominating the other parties, and allow the people to choose. I mean, what is so difficult about this? This is not rocket science. This is not, are you prepared to allow the destruction of an entire country just for the sole purpose of staying in power? This government needs to know this, that in every country where we've had despots, where we've had dictators, in every single country, at the end of the day, the people won. Every single country. There is not one country in the world, historically, where despots have survived or have succeeded over the people. In some countries, that's taken different times. Some countries, it's taken 5 years, others 10. In the case of Egypt, it took 30 years. But at the end of the day, the people, you see, because the voice of the people is the voice of God. Make no bones about it. The voice of the people is the voice of God. And when the people decide to speak, things happen. And I think that's what this government needs to understand, that the bon temps, the CO time is going to come to an end. And the people of Dominica who are concerned about the direction that this country is taking and has taken, the direction where we see our passports being hawked on the streets of Baghdad and on the streets of Kabul. I mean, give me a break. That is where we've put our country. I mean, enough is enough. And I think we are at this point where we're saying enough is enough. That the government, with 2 years left to election, there is more than enough time to clean the voters list. There is more than enough time to ensure that there is campaign finance reform, and there is enough time to have a free and fair election. And then let the people of Dominica, who according to the Constitution are qualified to vote, let them decide on their future leaders. That is simple. That's a very basic, simple thing. And we are not asking for gold and silver. We're asking for a process to be respected, a process to be observed. And we're saying that if this government is not in a position to give it, we the people will take it. And let's not be mixing words about this. Let's not be let's be very clear. I want everybody to be clear as to what I'm saying tonight on Q95, that if the government of Dominica is not prepared to give the people of Dominica electoral reform and to allow them to decide their own destiny, then the people of Dominica will take their destiny in their own hands. The voice of the people is the voice of God. Is the voice of God.
Lami, you want to take the call?
Let's try this now. Caller, are you still there? Go ahead, please.
Yes. Good evening, Lambi.
Good evening, sir.
Yes, and well said, Dr. Thompson. And good evening to the entire panel, and good evening to the leader of the opposition. And Lambi, I just want to endorse this program, having all teams on board. And I must say I'm excited to listen to such great great move to see a new Dominica. And I, of course, want to thank Mr. G immensely, sincerely. And I must say I'm pleased in the manner in which he was able to brave the questions and place them nicely, not the question, but lead the path. So I really want to applaud this forum, and I can only hope and look forward for many more like that. And I always like to quote that quote that I love: "Together we will, and together we can." Thank you very much, and may God bless the wonderful people of this great country.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. There, we have one more call on the line. Let's see. Call. No. That person's gone. Okay, still there. Caller, go ahead.
Yes. Good evening, Lambi, and good evening to the panel. Very good program. Very interesting.
Amen.
I'm just saying that it's not those who plant the tree that will necessarily get the shade of that tree or the trees. So, which means that if plans are well formulated by the various organizations and the people feel enticed to move, they will act. So the point is, the players, the doers, the actors, just put your plan together and leave it up to the people. They will act once they feel enticed. But one thing I know in a society, once a persons try to impose themselves on people, that will not last. And you know, that is the exact thing this government is doing, is imposing itself on the people. And you can feel the ranting and the raging. People do not want them, but they are actually imposing themselves on the people. That will not last. My friends, what is to come is closer than we think. Have a good night. Very good program.
Thank you very much. We do appreciate it. And there was one more call on the overseas line. That person seemed to have left. So, Mr. G, back to you.
Well, yes, you can interrupt us anytime, Lambi, but I have to say to Lennox Linton, I think the whole question of free and fair elections is a good action around which for people to galvanize. Who does not want free and fair elections in a democracy? Isn't that what a democracy is all about? So if all the various groups in society, all the organizations will get together and say, you know something, the church, I believe the bishop, in fact, had called for electoral reform at one time. I heard Pastor Randy Rodney calling for it. So it seems to me that if all of the groups in Dominica, the society is saying we want free and fair, it's a good place to start. Lamb, you want to take a call before I go to Mr. Linton?
Yes. Caller, please go ahead.
Hello, good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Happy New Year to all.
Same to you.
I want to congratulate all the members on the panel. Tonight is very positive in terms of what is the outcome of the findings. That's what we need to do to get Dominica out from where it is. But I want to just draw a little line with the Dominicans and the situation we're in based on our constitution. Our constitution being trampled on. In fact, not even the constitution that will prevent me from doing what I want. That's the attitude we have. Let's understand, in the US, Donald Trump wanted to step on the Constitution, and he called on his people to find him some votes. He needs X amount of votes in order to win or to take over the constitutional rights of the people of America. And his co-pilot, who was the deputy, his conscience said on that time that we cannot do it because this is a minority that want to rule a majority. Dominica, the opposition haven't lost an election over the number of years, but the election have been stolen because of these people that we bring in, the foreigners, the people that buy the votes they want to take over the Constitution. It is happening. We must put a stop to that. If the U.S. is now taking action against Donald Trump, what the people of Dominica is waiting for us to stand up against Roosevelt Skerrit and his colleagues. Because Dominica is not belonging to any one person. Dominica is for Dominicans. One man, one vote. That's why we're talking about the electoral reform. And our people cannot continue to just take the Donald Trump attitude and policy and just agree that we will go on and on. 2022. We have to take that number. This is two figures clash. When two figures clash, miracles happen. We have to see to it that this year, I say boots on the ground. If we don't have boots, come barefooted. Dominicans must be ready to stand up and say enough is enough. We want to be ruled by the Constitution and not by a man thinking that he have a backyard, a piece of garden, somebody give him his land and he doing what he wants with it. Barbados, Montserrat, this other place, Tortola, these places give their people front line. These are places that they did not take the independence, They stay under Britain, but they put their people in front of every other contractor that come into their country. In Dominica, we go for independence. We think that it was going to work for us. We start breaking the arms of the crab early, and we lost that independence. Now we are dependent, and we're so dependent that we cannot get ourselves out from where we are. Dominicans,
so Lambi,
independence, and we
need to take some calls,
Constitution that was given to Dominica. That is what we need to operate in order the interest of the poor people, their children and their grandchildren to be able to benefit from this Dominica.
Thank you, caller.
You men, I pray that God give all the strength, health, and the energy, the brains, the unity to be able to combine the forces. 2022 must make a difference. Roseau North, Roseau North, Roseau North. Wake up.
Thank you, caller. We do appreciate it. And back to you, Mr. G.
Well, that sounded like boots on the ground right there. All right, that's a big voice always there. Lennox Linton, I was saying that Lambi, just interrupt us if the calls come. We want to take the people's calls, but I was saying that, Lennox, to me, the whole notion of free and fair elections, one man, one vote, this to me is just a basic thing on which people could rally, around which people could rally. It seems to me that if we cannot rally around that, what else can we do? You see, somebody was saying, let's not put too many issues on the table at one time. I mean, because obviously if you get free and fair election and people get a government of their choice, and a government of their choice can go wrong doing the planning and implementing programs to ensure that they uplift the poorer classes and expand the middle class and give people, a little bit more wealth in their life. They can pay their bills much more easily and deal with the cost of living, and public servants can get their fair share like they do in St. Kitts if you get good governance, right? Well, Lennox, where do you think we stand in if all of these groups can get together? Then John takes the initiative to create the draft law, and if they are willing also to do a public accounts law as well, so that I feeling that public accounts committee is extremely important. You might want to guide me a little better on that. But certainly, if we simplify it and keep it simple and say, look, why don't all the groups come together around this draft legislation that somebody like an Ilya Williams, a constitutional law guy, could put together, and somebody, let's raise money to pay the man to do the work. They'll tell you, okay, I can do that in a month because he has all the electronic copies of all the laws from the other countries. If that can happen, then everybody should get together to my many voter groups, meet together and say in one common purpose and say, you know what, which they did before, and made these recommendations and presented this report to the Electoral Commission, I believe to Mr. Byron as well, it seems to me that is not something new. All they're doing is coming back together and saying, okay, we agree this is a good draft legislation that mirrors what is going on in the modern legislation in the Caribbean region, but from our neighbors. And we can see how much better Jamaica's elections have been conducted now because they've done their reforms. So if Mr. Lennox Linton, if you can get this draft and bring everybody together, and then Jam will help and everybody will help. And I hope by that time Thompson can come down and get arrested and spend his 2 days in there and come out and so on and be a part of this movement, just to make sure that we get free and fair election in Namdega. Your thoughts, Mr. Linton? Your mic. You need to unmute your mic. I'm not sure if Lennox is hearing me, but his mic is muted.
Yeah, this muting of mics is a discipline that we have to get good when we're on these shows.
Well, in 2022, we have to do that to start with.
Yeah, so Sheridan was saying we're not where we are because civil society organizations have stepped away from the responsibility of being proactive and being professional in their interventions insofar as electoral reform is concerned. You had some wonderful work that was done by a local civil society organization that grouped together a number of individual units within civil society and came up with recommendations that were proper, they were well thought out, and ought to have been utilized by the Electoral Commission. But what happened is, and you keep saying that everybody wants free and fair elections. No, Mr. Gregoire, no, Mr. G, not everybody wants free and fair elections in Dominica. And I can give an example. Roosevelt Skerrit does not want free and fair elections in Dominica. That is why we don't have it. Because it was the promise and the commitment of the Independent Electoral Commission since back in 2008 that they would have, at least before the next election, cleaned the voters list and issued ID cards for voting. Those very two basic elements of reform. And from 2008 until now, 14 years, Roosevelt Skerrit and his associates have fought against the idea and the necessity for free and fair elections in Dominica. And he knows why he's doing it. It is in an environment of unfair and elections and unfair elections that are not free that they can go ahead and do the things they have done, contrary to law, contrary to the Constitution, to take the reins of power in the last 3 election cycles. So no, not everybody wants free and fair elections. And we're not where we are as a result of a lack of recommendations, proper recommendation for electoral reform. Again, that group of civil society organizations presented a whole suite of recommendations. Had they been taken on board, we would not be where we are today. The Independent Electoral Commission, for example, decided on a re-registration of a verification of voters on the voters register, an exercise that was going to cost $300,000. And they would have comfortably got that done in order to hand out ID cards for the last election, well before the election. The government of Roosevelt Skerrit refused to give the $300,000, and therefore they could not proceed with the implementation of that particular recommendation that they took on board. What happened? After having yet another election without reform, Mr. Skerrit announced right after the stolen election of 2019 that he's bringing a consultant on board to advise on the way forward for electoral reform. You must understand that in 2019, we had an eminent group of election experts from the Commonwealth, from CARICOM, and from the OAS that teamed up at the request of the Prime Minister to point the way forward to the next election insofar as reform was concerned. And he then, having received their recommendations, scuttled them and made sure that nothing was implemented. So again, we're at a point now where a set of recommendations are about to be presented by Sir Dennis Byron. We don't know what's contained in those recommendations. But the big question remains, whether those recommendations are going to be implemented. And if they're not implemented, what is going to be the response of the people of Dominica to the extent that they accept that these recommendations are good and proper and fit for the purpose of electoral reform in Dominica? What will happen then? Because it seems to me that the movie keeps playing over and over and over again. And this time around, we're expecting a different ending. The question is, if the ending remains the same, what is going to be the response of the people of Dominica? Not what is going to be the response of Lennox Linton individually, because this is not my country, nor is it the country of any individual member of the panel tonight. It is our country. All of us together, wherever we are, living in Dominica, living overseas, we have a connection to this nature island by birth, or forefathers, or whatever it is. This is our piece of rock. And we have to decide how, working together, we're going to prevent a small group of individuals, private corrupt benefit, to continue to enjoy the reins of power because they have taken away from the people that fundamental right to elect a government of the people, by the people, for the people, and they have abrogated that right unto themselves. It is wrong, and it should not be allowed to stand in 2022. So we're at a watershed moment right now where any minute, any day, any week now, the recommendations from eminent jurist Sir Dennis Byron will drop. I would expect that it will go to the Electoral Commission, it would go to the government, it will come to players like ourselves, and then we will make a call on what is there and whether that will allow electoral reform or it will allow further electoral deform, because there's a difference. There's a difference between electoral reform and electoral deform. The government of Roosevelt Skerrit has been pushing electoral deform for the last 3 election cycles. They want to deform the electoral process and keep it that way for their own private personal benefit. We want reform, and we will draw the line between what is reform and what is deform. We'll reject deform, we'll embrace reform. So to the extent that we have recommendations that push us down the line of genuine electoral reform from Sir Dennis Byron, we will be out there advocating for swift, speedy implementation by the Electoral Commission, properly funded by the government. We are not going to tolerate a situation where the Electoral Commission will want to do what is right for Dominica by bringing on board and implementing those recommendations, and then the government will be standing in the way by refusing to provide the resources. You see how easy it was for them to define the $450,000 for Sir Dennis Byron. The rubber has hit the road, and we're coming now to decision time. What are we as a people going to do if the Labour Party and Roosevelt Skerrit decides once again that recommendations have been made, they are not going to facilitate them because they don't like the recommendations? He has done it before. 2019, he asked for recommendations from the OAS, the Commonwealth, and the CARICOM. They gave him the recommendations, and because he didn't like those recommendations, he pushed them aside. He cannot be allowed to do that this time around. Let us see what Sir Dennis Byron says, and let us tonight ask Sir Dennis Byron, hey, what's up, sir? What's up with those recommendations? We've been expecting them since November of last year. We heard they were going to be coming in January. Well, we've come to the 11th of January today, and we hope it's not going to be, we're not going to be hearing February or March. We expect the recommendations to drop so that the sleeping Electoral Commission can get to work.
All right. So here's the thing. I just wanted to, Lambi, you want to take a call?
Let's see the person still there. Caller is still there? No, I think he's left.
All right, so here's the thing. First of all, I want to make a little correction. I misspoke when I said I think Eliud Williams. I really meant Eliud Charles, who is the attorney that would be drafting this, that could draft, people like him who could draft constitutional legislation. But I just wanted to make this point, though, Lennox. I was hoping that we'd have passed that stage where we were waiting for a report and waiting for a government plan. I thought we were looking at the mode where the people decided, okay, we presented reports, the OAS has presented reports. We expect that Sir Byron will present a report. But the fact of the matter is, NJAM is saying, let us go ahead and craft legislation, which is modern legislation that's in keeping with what has been happening in the Caribbean, that have already been endorsed by people like the OAS and CARICOM and so on. Let's put that legislation, let's get that, and then all of us, everybody, all interests get together and say, we are going to stand behind this legislation and we're going to take concerted action together and stand until this legislation is passed. Yes, you might expect the government, the Attorney General, say, okay, we want to make some modifications here and there, and people sit down and discuss. But the fact of the matter is, if the people, and that is why I'm saying happened in 79, if the people in 79 decided this is what we want and nothing's going to happen, and the country was shut down for 3 months, if the people decide that it's so important to have free and fair elections and they want to stand behind it, they will get it. I do not think any government will really stand behind in the way of all of the people, all of the interests who are saying, listen, we want free and fair elections and even playing field so you can own and you get the government that you want. I cannot see why any government would want to stop that. It would be madness for them to try to stop that. And therefore, I'm suggesting that we should, that is where the mind should be working out. Because as Bernard has been saying, and everybody saying, everybody put their heads together, create that space, and so that you can have that dialogue. So everybody decide, you know what, let Illy or whoever come up with that draft legislation. Let's find a way to help to pay for it. So that comes up, we're happy with it. It reflects all the things that we want for electoral and campaign finance reforms. Let's stand behind it. Let all the groups come together again, just like they did to provide that report, and say, listen, this is what we want. We're presenting it to the Electoral Commission. We're asking them to try to persuade the government to pass that, put that in Parliament and pass it, because this is what looks like the modern legislation that Bernard was talking about. Thompson and Bernard, what are your thoughts? I think to me, we're talking action now. I'm not sure you want to go back into worrying about whether or not.
Well, I think that, I mean, I had laid out a couple positions earlier. I do not see a problem with drafting legislation that we believe advances the cause of democracy.
Absolutely. You're absolutely correct. I think the time of discussions and even waiting for Sir Byron is a waste of time. The Electoral Commission knows what to do. This is not rocket science. This has been done in Antigua. It has been done in Jamaica. It has been done in Grenada. It has been done in St. Lucia. They never went for those kind of rigmarole and zeze, paying all that money to consultants. No. This is a very straightforward process. You clean the voters list. You pass legislation to even the playing field. You don't need a consultant for that. You just need to get it done. And so, I think this government must be on notice that there are some people who are prepared to not only talk about it, but take action. And I think that's where we are at this point. As I said at the beginning, and I will reiterate, I will say it again, there are only two ways forward on this. Either Skerrit does the right thing and guards his legacy, or the people take matters into their own hands and stand for electoral reform. If that means going on the streets, shutting down the country, civil disobedience, that is what it takes. Let us do it. I mean, there should not be any discussion around that. We cannot go into another cycle of election where the government feels that it can deprive us of our basic fundamental human right, which is a right to a fair election. We cannot just continue that level of abuse, a systematic abuse, and just take it. I mean, come on. We've gone through this thing in two cycles. I sat back in Dominica in 2014 and saw this guy destroy legal ballots. Look at my ballots and said the X was too small, and reject those ballots just so I would lose an election. I took that and I restrained myself. Because the level of abuse was so great that I could have gone out of my mind and done anything. I restrained myself. So I know the lengths that these people are prepared to go. Now we are prepared to push back. Okay, and I think that is what we are talking about tonight. We are talking about pushing back. And I hope the actions of NJAM, combined with the actions of the United Workers' Party, with the Dominican Freedom Party, can point the people in this direction. We have to make it clear. We're not going to complicate matters. We're not going to add too many things into the basket. The fundamental thing we want now is for free and fair elections, and those free and fair elections can only come by way of electoral reform, period. Once we get that, when there is a free and fair election, if the people of Dominica feel they want to re-elect Roosevelt Skerrit, I will be the first in line to congratulate him, if it is done on the free and fair conditions. But don't expect me, if you are prepared to steal another election, if you're prepared to treat, if you're prepared to go against the rules of Dominica, don't expect me to just sit back and do nothing. And so I hope that the people of Dominica are at this point, and I feel that they are. I believe that the people of Dominica are at the point where, and every civic-minded person, every right-thinking Dominican are at the point where they are believing and they know now that they have to take action. We still have 2 years. There is enough time to fix this, but we have to demand it. We have to demand it, and that is where we are going tonight. I'm not in that long pally business and so on. I think we have to do it. And of course, we can't reveal, as Ken say, you can't reveal all of your strategies, but certainly a strategy is being formed, and it will involve calling upon the people of Dominica to take the necessary action to ensure electoral reform.
Excellent. Bernard, go to you. I just want to see if Lambi wants to take a quick call here.
Go ahead.
On the overseas line, please go ahead with your call. Caller on the overseas line, are you paying attention? Mr. G, that person is not paying attention.
It looks like you don't have that call there. One of the things I was going to put it to Bernard, really, because I mean, it seems to me that you have to keep this thing simple. I mean, free and fair elections. You don't want to complicate the matter. You know, the question is, we may think we have a lot of time to do this. That's why I thought about 2022. But remember, elections can be called early. They've been called early before in Dominica. They called very early in Barbados. It's almost 2 years before the election is actually constitutionally due in Barbados. It's quite a few months before. Election can be called early.
Sheridan. The person who will call the election before it is constitutionally due and before sensible, proper, widely accepted reforms have been put in place is the very same man who has not wanted and has fought against electoral reform since 2008. But he can call election before the recommendations go into place.
That is clearly understood. But I'm saying the people, if they really want to have the laws passed, if you do a very good job of drafting some very good laws, the modern laws which are in keeping with the laws that is in the region already, that OAS approved, everybody approved, CARICOM approved, and they're working better because we saw the example of Jamaica. And Jamaica's model is very simple. It's very straightforward. We can practically use it with some minor modifications for the electoral laws as well as the campaign finance laws. It seems to me you don't really need to wait for too much to do that. If all the groups decide to get, we're going to get behind that. And we're going to come together and say we're going to stay, we want to demand that. Bernard, your thoughts?
Yeah, on the legislative route, I agree it is a useful thing to do, and it's probably something that we should do regardless of what else we do. I believe if we can draft that legislation and get people galvanized around it and get people moving on the streets on it, then we may get some traction here. I hesitate though, because I am not too optimistic that will in fact happen. I am not too optimistic that the issue of electoral reform as currently phrased is interesting enough, exciting enough, motivating enough, captivates, and maybe half the people do not understand the issue of electoral reform. And so can we galvanize people around the issue of that? Now, the issue of democracy and the erosion for democracy is very critical, and we can craft a narrative around that, truly. But I think, again, is the narrative that we tell. I don't think the narrative of just talking about electoral reform in this dry, legalistic sense is going to motivate anyone to go out on the streets and protest and block traffic and do all the things that brings the country to a halt. I'm not convinced that that is so. Now, in concept, yes, if we could get that to be a motivating issue that brings people out on the streets and put pressure on the government to pass that, that would be something. But I am convinced this government will do everything in its power to delay and call snap elections, whatever it takes, so that they do not pass electoral reform before the next election. I see no way, even if we do those things, that this government is going to do this. They'll simply call a snap election, be done with it for the next, and get away with it again. The whole point of bringing Byron in is to just delay the conversation, or to continue the conversation, actually, to continue the conversation of electoral reform consultants and all these things, to just continue that conversation. It's a good conversation for them. It's a winning issue for them. Distract the opposition with talks of electoral reform, distract the people with talks of electoral reform, bringing people to talk about it, just drag it out. And I'm not convinced that on its face value, electoral reform is going to be the galvanizing issue that brings people out on the street. It's very important. And I think, in my mind, we should focus on doing effective electoral reform. Why can't we create a clean voters list? We should be able to go out into every community, get the voters list, do the things we need to do, data analytics, cross-referencing, all the things that can be done with modern technology, and create in every community. I mean, it's a small place. Everyone knows everybody. Everybody who knows who's overseas. Everybody who knows whose grandmother is on the list. We can put our energies and focus into effective electoral reform, where we have a clean voters list. And then we can go into those constituencies and we can campaign and we can talk about, here is the list and here's the discrepancy. And that way we can galvanize people emotionally to say, these people are still in your constituency away from you. But I think focusing on the legalistic approach and say, well, you guys need to do electoral reform and keep beating that drum, they're not going to do it. They have absolutely no incentive to do it. And that's why I'm a little bit skeptical about that particular approach.
Yeah,
Right.
I'm sure.
One minute, Kent. 1 minute. I just want to say something to Bernard. You see, Bernard is a fellow who speaks very well. You see, his English is a lot better than mine. When Bernard speaks like that, it's so convincing. If you were to take that same articulation, that same level of conviction, and go on the ground and sell it to the people, not in the legalistic terms, but in terms that you know very well how to do it, to make the people understand what their interest is when you have free and fair elections, when you get a government of your choice, a government that will not oppress you or repress you, a government that will help you to move from poverty into the middle class, a government that's going to help you if you're an entrepreneur who has ideas, put your ideas into play, develop yourself so you don't have to become totally independent, more dependent that you are now, so that you don't become mendicant. So if, and I know that your fellow, your English is so much better than mine, Bernard, I'm listening I believe if you commit yourself to going out to do that, by the time you go out there and translate, it's not going to sound like a legalistic thing about electoral reform, you know. It will show the people what their stake is in that electoral reform, how it's going to affect them as a farmer, how it's going to affect them as a plumber or electrician or as a nurse. Or this is the point. I don't think the idea would be, and listen, I'm going back to 79. I mentioned a man called Zaboka, Louis Benoit. It wasn't any highfalutin language. Zaboka said, listen, we have to get this. The port is going to close. It's not going to work. That's what he said, you know. And that happened. It's not any kind of long, highfalutin, hallelujah stuff, you know, Bernard. The man said, listen, and Charles Sapres said, the nurses shall not work. The hospital shall not work. This shall not work. That shall not work. Everybody agreed that shall not work. They stayed out for 3 months. The people got 131%. Who wouldn't go out for 131% increase now? They went out for 131%. They got a salary increase. So in other words, everybody got what they wanted out of it. That is what we're talking about, Bernard. Not just going out there and have fancy language about legalistic terms. That is not the way these things are done, you know. I'm from the country. I'm not from Roseau, you know. I'm from the country. Country people don't speak so. You see, you go down to people and you explain to them in their circumstance how that is going to impact their life, right? You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
I see what you're saying, Mr. G, but what if I pitched instead to the young people, you have no future in this country. It's been stolen away from you. We represent a future that you can believe in, that you can live in your country, and you can prosper in your country, and you can have a set of life, connected in a community, and have a future in your country, because a few folks are stealing it away from you. I mean, that has more emotional appeal to me.
Yes, I'm sorry.
That is what
you do not have. I know the argument on democracy. Don't get me wrong.
You see what I was saying? You see, you see how good he's doing it. You see how well.
Yes, exactly.
Talking about going to, that is what you explain to them, how the electoral reform and free and fair going to translate into their life. That is what you're doing right now. That is what you explain it.
Right, but unfortunately, Bernard, I have not been at some of our recent meetings at NJAM, and I really didn't want to get into that kind of level of detail of discussion. But since he raised those things, I have to speak to the public, because what we have to say to the public is this, and Thompson put it right. You have to understand what we're up against. Thompson put it right in there in the counting of votes. They were willing to deprive him of a legitimate vote. That's a demonstration to show you the lengths at which this government will go to retain power. That is a powerful illustration. In other words, they will use the police if they have to. They will do anything they have to retain votes, except if we put all our efforts together and it becomes a people thing and the people decide enough is enough. No, you cannot cheat, you cannot steal, you cannot bring in your illegal people, you cannot bring in the SSU, you cannot do that unless the people put their foot down and say no. But there has to be something we have to rally around. The basic point of bringing in a government is free elections. And that's the way they have robbed us in every way whatsoever. It is not as simple as going through a list, because you'll go through the list and they will still say you cannot put the X. It is not as basic as that. It is a determination of our people, in the words of Thompson. If you won't do it, we the people will do it. And all it takes for we the people to do it is to act together. Now, that doesn't say you don't get to the hearts of the people. That's why I said you were not at many of our meetings. That doesn't say that in talking to the people and letting them understand, and Sheridan, you said it right, you talk to them.
Kent might be having a little internet issue, a temporary issue there. I'm pretty sure it'll come back on in a minute. But while Kent's issue is being tidied up, maybe we might want to just take a little response from Bernard there. Or Lennox, you might have something additional that you might want to add to this.
Just to make the observation, Sheridan, that and to Bernard's point, there have been instances that I'm aware of over the last 10 years when our party engaged the claims and objections process in order to effect change on the register. In other words, we had a couple of constituencies where we combed through the list and took out all the dead people, the people who were living overseas for 5 years and so on, and presented that to the Electoral Commission. Nothing was done. We have not been as successful as we should be in engaging the claims and objections process to have the list sanitized. And to your point, Bernard, yes, it is a way in which the list can be sanitized. But it's only we don't have control of the list. We only have control of what we can present to the commission in terms of names we feel should be struck off the register. Now, we have seen in other countries the Electoral Commission publishing in their respective gazettes lists of persons who they believe are satisfied, have been living overseas for more than 5 years, or according to the time provided by their laws, and people who are dead. And those names are published in the Gazette with a note that your name is going to be struck off the register within this period of time. If you have reason why it should remain, please contact the commission. And through that process, which is considered fair to all, names are removed or names remain. The problem we have in Dominica is much bigger than that. It has to do with the reach, the long arm of the government reaching into the day-to-day operations of the Electoral Commission and preventing things that could happen by operation of law from happening. That is why I'm saying tonight, very simply, we in the United Workers' Party expect that the long-awaited recommendations from Commissioner Byron will be with us before the end of this month, January. Once we get those recommendations, we'll be sitting down with our civil society partners, with our political colleagues in different political parties, and determining whether these recommendations are fit for purpose. Once they are fit for purpose, we will be advocating implementation of the recommendations for electoral reform in the areas of cleaning the list, in the areas of issuing ID cards for voting, in the areas of regularizing the overseas vote, in the areas of enforcing the rule of law provisions against bribery, cheating, and other offenses. We will be accepting, to the extent that they emerge, the recommendations for legislative changes to facilitate access, fair access to media to all political parties during an election period, and critically, recommendations for election campaign financing, which, since this is under the hand of an eminent jurist now, we'll be expecting that model legislation will be presented as part of the recommendations in that regard. Once that is what we get, we will be working and encouraging our civil society and political partners to go forward together with a demand that implementation of the recommendations must be completed by a certain date later on in the year, 31st of July, 31st of August, sometime around there. We should put a time frame on implementation of the recommendations and to commit ourselves. If we do not get implementation by that time, what action will be taken by the people? We have to get serious about this. We have been down this road too often in the last 14 years. It is no longer tolerable.
Yes, and I think that obviously that's a good way to go, because I mean we're talking action, because you have to have something around which to galvanize action. So I think I heard Lennox pulling out some of the actions there, but I mean certainly I am not one that believes that you should wait to take action. You should always try to help yourself. Charity begins at home, and I think NJAM is doing the right thing to try to craft this draft legislation around which people can rally, because I believe what more legislation can we come up with at this time, which is by far much more superior than what obtains now in Jamaica. I've seen the laws. We've got several programs on the laws, on the electoral laws and the campaign finance laws. We've seen Antigua's, we've seen Trinidad's, we've seen St. Kitts and all of that. I'm not so sure we can come up with better legislation than what could come off using the Jamaican as a model and then building on that. So I think whatever comes out of the report, any report, will probably have to end up in legislation that's going to go to the parliament for passage. That is where I think the people should come in to stand and say, listen, I mean, the powers that big and say, listen, we're not doing that until 2 years from now. But the people have to say no, as Lennox is saying, okay, we want it in July, because we think it's a reasonable thing to have. If Antigua can have it and Jamaica can have it and St. Kitts can have it, why not us? It's only reasonable. All the legal luminaries have recommended it. So, you know, the people of Dominica have also recommended. The people of Dominica have spent their money, drafted the legislation, make life easy for our AG. Let's do it, and let's do it by whatever date. I think that is where all of these groups have to come in and say, listen, we really need to get some action now, to speak to our leaders and to make sure that they listen to us. And whatever action you have to take to stand up, sometimes things have to be disrupted, you know. In 1979, the city just closed down for 3 months. I know the truck drivers, the truck equipment people had their transport some be under the cliff sometimes, but they said they parked on the side. It's very difficult to get something going if you park on the side. It seems to me if they had double parked, it might have been a lot more effective. Maybe they got results, I don't know, but I have not heard what results they got from their action. Maybe if they had double or triple park, who knows, they may have got some action by now. So the point I'm making is that when people take action, and it's okay for people to take action, which is action to get the right thing for the people. It is not too much. And here's what I cannot stress that too much. It cannot be too much to ask for free and fair elections. I think you should keep it as simple, as basic as that. Just ask for free and fair elections. Tom Thompson, it's time for us to really wind down. We didn't take as many calls as we'd want to, but Kent, let me just go to you first for your. Yeah, let me just go.
Sheridan, if I could just butt in there and probably as my final comments as well.
Okay.
I am fairly dropping asleep there.
I know.
Because it's approaching 5 in the morning.
Oh boy.
For me. Let me just say this. If this government believes that somehow they have this right given to them to force their rule upon the people of Dominica, to use the police, to use other means at their disposal to suppress the rights of the people. If they think they have this divine right, it's okay. But they believing that they have this divine right does not mean that we, who see things differently, should not react to this. And that's what I'm saying. We've spoken a lot. We've said a lot of things. But ultimately, we have to be prepared to take the action that you keep harking back to 1979. I was a child, but I was old enough to remember and to see the events of 1979. Again, I call upon the strength of our ancestors. We are a nation of Neg-Mawo. We are a nation. This nation was built on resistance. We had Neg-Mawo who did not spend a day under the yoke of slavery because they chose differently. So all I'm saying is this: they might feel they have this divine right, but it's up to us to push back. It is up to us to say, no, Dominica does not belong to you. Dominica belongs to all of us. There is a process on that's through the democratic system, which allows us to choose the government of our own choosing, and you cannot keep forcing your governance on us. Enough is enough. We are saying very clearly that the way to fix this is through electoral reform. And Bernard, with all due respect to what you said earlier, you need to remember that the Electoral Commission is neither free nor fair. The Electoral Commission, what you said would work if we had an independent Electoral Commission. That's not the case, because this government again has taken all of the instruments of government, everything that was meant for the process to work right. They have hijacked those organizations, so we cannot get any help from that. We have to take matters in our own hands, and that will obviously mean taking to the streets when the time is right and calling for those things that we inherently believe in. And we believe that right now what we need is electoral reform. We believe that what we need is a change in government. We believe that what we need is a time to say enough is enough. There has been enough looting of the country resources. There has been enough malgovernance. There has been enough corruption. There has been enough turning of the backs on the people of Dominica. There has been enough of making the people of Dominica subservient, piling on poverty, piling on misery, and making us mendicant, making Dominica a mendicant society. We need to break free from this. We have the power within ourselves to do it, and I would urge the people of Dominica, when the time comes, that they have to be prepared to stand up, to stand against this government, and take every and all action that is necessary to ensure that we get electoral reform, to ensure that we get free and fair election, and ultimately to ensure that the people of Dominica have a government that they can trust, a government that will be for the people and by the people.
And thanks a lot.
And on this note, Sheridan, I want to duck out just a little bit. I have some meetings coming on, and you need to take a quick rest before I get to work. So thanks for the opportunity.
And thanks a lot.
Certainly, I've been getting quite a lot of feedback on Facebook. The time for coming to Dominica is approaching, so that will come, and I believe that we just have to keep the pressure. We just have to keep, pressing for what we want. I mean, Dominica is in a place where all of us, every right-thinking Dominican knows that this is not the place where we should be, that we can do better. And let us work hard, let us work together, let us work collectively. Importantly, we need to work together as a team, United Workers' Party, Freedom Party, NJAM, other civic groups, Monsewie, every other group that is determined to make a change in Dominica. Let us work together and let us push that agenda.
Yeah, and Thompson, thanks a lot so much for making your Thompson. It's a big sacrifice on your part. We know that. So I hope you have a good night's rest. And until next time. All right. So as I go over to Bernard, Bernard, I just want us to make a final closing remarks. I just want to remind us, because Thompson mentioned about the police, right? I just want to remind us, in 1979, I was on Kennedy Avenue, close to the ministry. And I saw when the defense force arrived in a huge bus. All of them had some long rifles in their total army outfit, fully geared. And the riot gear, and they marched up to the ministry. Bernard, what happened is that the crowd was so big there. And then when they look in the crowd, they saw their cousin, they saw their auntie, they saw their nene, they saw their power, they saw their friends. These fellas, they went back. They didn't have a choice, because that crowd was just too massive for them to intimidate anybody. They were just totally outnumbered. If then the people decide that they're standing for something that is right, that is legitimate, that is righteous, they will succeed. The church was involved, I tell you. The private sector was involved. Everybody, if you get that kind of grouping coming together again, for something like free and fair elections, it will work. So do not be afraid of those things, Bernard, because I mean, it is really the people's action that can ensure that they get the result. If the people are really motivated to do this, just for something like free and fair elections, it will happen. Bernard, your closing remarks?
Yeah, Mr. G, I completely agree with you. Do not get me wrong at all that I am in any way shy, averse, or opposed to social action and social movements and political action and action on the streets. This is a legitimate form of social protest, a legitimate form of governance, because at some point, these are mechanisms and activities within the law that's allowed to allow the greater society to have a say, to break certain log jams and to get certain things done. So in no way do I have any reservations about us, and at that point, I think, is here to take strong action and to motivate people to take strong action. My only reservation is the particular issue that we choose to lead with. However, that said, we have to be united in purpose and cause. And if we as a group decide that this is the particular action, the particular avenue, the particular issue that we want to pursue and put our concerted efforts into it, then that meshes with my disposition for concentrated action, strategic action. And so the concept of the thing is completely clear, and I am completely in line with that. As I said, whether that particular issue would be one I would lead off with is just, a particular perspective. So to wrap up the session, I mean, I think this is what we need to do. We need to have this sort of dialogues. We need to have continued dialogue so that we don't lose the momentum. We keep the energy high. We keep the passion. We keep the motivation. We all have times when it's a difficult slog, and we have to motivate and encourage each other. to move the needle forward. And we have to motivate and encourage the Dominican public. We have been placed in positions of leadership, and we have a responsibility, I think, to do what leaders do, which is to communicate a vision and to rally people to a just cause and a just nation. So I am all for that. Dominica needs us more than ever. As I said, we can't get to 50 years as a nation, which will happen here in the next few years, in this condition. It is unacceptable. We had a better destiny in ahead of us than this. And let's hope that in the next 50 years, Dominicans will look back at this period as a strange, aberrant, sort of dysfunctional period of Dominican life that took us down the wrong path, because there is an impression that we're doing okay, but we're doing terribly. We are maintaining ourselves together with a few handouts from the passports to maintain some level of stability, but we have no economic engine. We have no social community bonding. We have lost the sense of caring and connectedness. We have lost the rule of law. People operate outside of the law. The Labour Party is more powerful than the state. And that is a really dysfunctional system, because the state should be the most powerful institution in a society that with institutions that control the state. But the Labour Party is more powerful than the state with the resources at its disposal. And so we're in an existential situation, a very odd, strange situation. And I want us to keep thinking creatively, motivating each other, and looking at creative ways to outsmart those guys, because we can't do it. They are not the cleverest people in the world. They don't have all the answers. They don't have all the angles covered. We have to find ways, creative, innovative ways, new conversations, change the battlefield, change the grounds that we operate on, and keep doing those things to shake it up. We can't do business as usual. That will not work. They have figured out that game and cornered the chess pieces on that game. We have to go play on a different board, and that's what we have to start doing here in 2022. And I think this program, this conversation is a great start to that. So let's keep doing that. We're all united in that purpose. There is no daylight between us in wanting to accomplish that strategic, focused, united approach to getting the island we want.
Very, very well said. You see, I always told you your English was better than mine, Bernard. I don't know why you're not listening to me when I tell you that, man. Your English is good. If you go out and explain those things to these young people, they will understand you better than they will understand me. But it was very well said. Now, remember, the reason why you're telling people you have to have free and fair elections, so you can get a government that you're of your own choosing. You choose people who think are capable, who will deliver for you the things that will make your life better. So the farmer has to, when you go to the farmer, you have to show him how getting good governance will improve your life on your farm. Maybe you might be able to go back to the days when you were paying cash for your vehicle and building your little home on your farm. And no longer will people just take your land and don't pay you for it. So this is the point. So, I mean, when you come to the young people who have all these bright ideas for agribusiness and manufacturing, so you have to explain to them that is why you need a government that is going to be, responsive to your needs and your ambitions and your creativity and so on, to take you to get, so that you can be wealthy too. Kent, why is that? Is it that just a select few must get all the millions from the passport money? And then all the majority of the young people who are so bright and intelligent and want to do things, they don't want to depend on anybody. They want to depend on themselves, on their own creativity. Why can't some of that spread to some of them so that they too can do their own business? Be like Suki, become self, be independent. So Kent, as you close up, I just want to say that the purpose of doing this thing, telling people why you want these reforms, is to get good governance so that we no longer have this crisis of governance, as some of us were talking about earlier, so you can get a result. So Kent, your final words?
Yeah, definitely, Sheldon. Some of the young people haven't seen better. They're so young that most of their own life they have only experienced the Labour Party. So we have to educate them, and we have to tell them exactly what you're saying. We've got to show them that better can be done, and the foundation for that is good governance. The foundation for that is bringing in a government of your choosing who can do it exactly as you said it. So I'm in full agreement with you on that, and that's what we'll be doing. But it's time for us to do it as a Dominica movement. And I want to correct you, jokingly, of course, on one thing. When you said the followers of NJAM will add to the followers of Freedom and the followers of this. And I know what you mean. But jokingly, the truth is, what we are looking for is for the followers of UWP to be followers of NJAM, the followers of Freedom to be followers of NJAM, the followers of the Labour Party, and there are many people in there who want different, to be followers of NJAM. If you get what I'm trying to say, it has to begin to be a Dominica movement, because we are at this crossroads where if we don't do it as one people stand together, we will be in deeper and deeper and deeper trouble. So we can no longer sit and wait for this to happen and that to happen and Byron to do this and this person to do this. We've got to take the process into our hands and let it happen. The electoral drafting of the law is just the start of taking things in our own hands, but there has to be a process and timelines, as we all said here tonight, and that's exactly where we're going to go. But you know, we can all do this together, saving our country. We all have a role to play. So I just want to speak a little bit just to the various groups in our society. I want the unions to understand, and we'll have conversations with them, that this is their core business. Yes, you're looking for living and working conditions for your workers and all of that. But at the end of the day, all of that depends on how well the country is managed. And when a government is mismanaging and corruptly managing, it becomes your core business to want better governance. Yes, I know a few people within your unions will disagree because they are still, you know, in the party mindset. But I think the majority of people will begin to understand that it has to be a Dominica movement. I want to speak to our civic organizations. There are some doing some great work. But I want to speak to them to let them know that we all have to come and become part of that one Dominica movement. I want to speak to our people of faith, that you have a role to play. And I always remember in the Bible when a great man like John the Baptist stood once and spoke to the great Herod and told him what he was doing was wrong. I want to encourage you, our faith leaders, that there are times when you've got to speak. There are times you have got to pray. And there are many times, and all times, you've got to pray. Men are always to pray. But there are times when God has called us to speak. And we'll be doing the nation a disservice if we don't speak. But we'll be coming to you. We'll be speaking with you. We'll be coveting your prayers, and we'll be coveting your voices as well, because all of us now have to come together. People of faith, organizations, faith-based organizations, we got to do it. I want to speak to the political parties. Well, I mean, we have heard from the leaders, so we know the political parties understand the need. But the farmers, Sheridan, you mentioned farmers. They are suffering. I want to speak to farmers. We have to come together to create a better Dominica. It starts with starting with electoral reform. Of course, there are other things NJAM will be doing to demonstrate that we can do better, and we'll be doing a lot of work on that other side. But in terms of working together to ensure that we can save our country and have electoral reform, I want to speak to you, every taxpayer, and I'll be talking to you how we can help, because our actions will include going on the streets if it takes that, but there are other actions we can do. So I want to begin to send you a hint, taxpayers. All of you are important. And I want to begin to send the private sector. You see, when we all act together, when taxpayers decide to take actions, when farmers decide to take action, when the private sector decide to take action, when the unions decide to take action, and the faith-based organizations raise their voices and their prayers and begin to take action in solidarity, when we all come together to do it, there is no force that can stop us, especially when we lay before God and say, God, we are downtrodden. Give us the help. We're going to rise and we're going to act, and we want your help. You know, many of us will have to sacrifice a little. Sarah, you said it earlier in a different way. But we ought to understand that unless we make that little sacrifice to save our country, unless we do that, we are just going to keep going downhill and downhill and downhill. It's time for us to rise and stand together to save our country.
And thank you very much for that, Kent. I know that when we leave here tonight, and Bernard will go back and he'll speak to his executive in the Dominica Freedom Party. I know, Kent, you will go and speak to the executive, and I'm sure you're already discussing all of the initiatives already. I'm pretty sure going forward. I have to just make one little adjustment here, though, Kent. In my mind, I was thinking it might be easier for NJAM to follow the followers of Freedom Party And
Well, both ways.
and to follow the followers of the DPSU, and to follow the followers of the UWP, and so on.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Easier that way. In other words, I think everybody should be in this thing together as one.
Exactly.
And I like the way Bernard put it earlier. He said you need to create that forum, that space, that structure, in other words, to do that, what you're talking about, Kent. So I believe,
totally right.
Mr. Opposition Leader, you have the last word.
Well, thank you very much, Sheridan. Thank you very much, Kent. Thanks, Bernard. Thanks, Thompson, for your clarity on the issues that went back and forth between us tonight, all about the nation's business. And thanks to the people of Dominica for joining and interacting. The reason we focus on the importance, the sacred nature of government of the people, by the people, for the people, and the responsibility and right of the people to elect a government of their choice by majority vote. It's because when that doesn't happen, when an individual or group of people takes away from the people that right, all that happens after that is what the people who have taken away the right from the people want to happen. And usually, because this is the playbook of despots, the people go downwards into a spiral of dependency and poverty and joblessness and hopelessness. We've seen it happen in many countries in the world. We are on the verge of going down that road, which is why we stand firmly to protect Dominica. And I'll give you an example. If you look at the numbers that they give you right now regarding the economy of Dominica, and you take an indicator like debt to GDP ratio, the people of Dominica are being told that they owe somewhere in the region of $1.4 billion right now, which represents 115% of the GDP of the country. Broken down to the individuals living in Dominica, 70,000 rounded just about. That means a debt of $20,000 on the back of each person living in Dominica right now. But that's not what it is, because we have shown that for a 4-year period, where $5.4 billion was collected from the sale of Dominican citizenship, only $1.2 billion came into the people's treasury, which means $4.2 billion of the people's money is out there unaccounted for, representing $60,000, $60,000 for each member of the Dominica population, man, woman, and child right now. When you don't stand for your right to participate in this democracy and your right to be in charge of the governance of your country, these are the kinds of things that can happen. It is not necessary for Dominica to be spiraling downwards into joblessness and hopelessness and dependency. We have enough money that has been raised, thankfully, from the sale of our passports on the international market to have us in a much better position than we are today. And the only reason we are in that position is because those who have been in government in the last 20 years are all about self, are not about the people, and are using any means necessary to keep themselves there, not for the benefit of people, but for the benefit of themselves. So they can saddle you, on one hand, with $20,000 of debt each from the national debt, while in reality, the state really has for its citizens $60,000 each in surplus sitting out there somewhere. And to the point about the state and the government being more powerful than the state, that's not reality, That's what it seems like. And that only happens where the people in government have been able to con the majority population into believing that government is more powerful than the state. The state is the people. We, the people, are the state of Dominica. The government cannot be more powerful than us unless we give the government that feeling that it is more powerful than us. And so tonight, as we close this program, I call on the patriots of Dominica far and near to rally behind the cause, the movement for change in Dominica that is demanding electoral reform at the moment, that is demanding equal opportunity for all Dominicans, and that is demanding a movement away, a cessation of this treatment of Dominican citizens as second class in their own country, where they are being schemed out of participation in the build-out of the economic infrastructure that is financed from their own money collected from the sale of our passports. Nowhere else in the world is this atrocity taking place. And Dominica must understand, we're an exception. We're an exception, and we're going to be that exception for as long as we choose to be. The minute we recognize that responsibility to stand, we will get what we have to do done for God and country in Dominica. Because I think it was Thompson who hinted earlier, persistent injustice never lasts. The people who are benefiting from the persistent injustice believe that it will go on forever. And that's the mistake they always make. Because at some point, and in Dominica, hopefully someday coming soon, the people of this blessed country are going to rise up against the evils that beset them. Mr. Gregoire, thank you very much. Q95, thank you very much. God bless you, gentlemen.
Well, thank you very much for being here with us here tonight as well, Lennox. I just want to leave our listeners and all of you with this thought that, as I said, somebody asked the question, well, look, how is that going to happen? If you decide you want reform, how is it going to happen? Just remember I said this. In 1979, I was standing on Kennedy Avenue, and there were so many people already ministry. The defense force came. Remember somebody also nobody police. Defense force came, all your guns. When they went in there and they saw so many people they saw there, then they saw their cousins and their aunties and their sisters and their neighbors, everybody else, how they can shoot people. And so they went back. That is what happens to people power. So when you talk about the state having a lot of power, the people have more power than the state. Because the people who implement the thing I said are the people who are elected by the people. Now, if the people who you elect know that you seriously want to take them out, they will do what you want. Because they want to be in there. They cannot be in there and not do what you want. And you standing firm, you have so many people out there standing firm. How are they going to get away with that? The only reason that any government can get away with that, if the people show weakness and do not stand. But if, for example, you take this electoral and say, we want this, here's what we want, it is reasonable because everybody else has the same thing. You're not asking for more than what the other people have. And they're going to stand for it. Truck drivers, bus operators, carpenters, masons, public servants, nurses, everybody, port workers. If everybody decides, that is reasonable, the people will prevail and the politicians will be happy to establish their legacy, as Thompson Fountain is saying, by just giving in to the wishes of the people. When you have numbers, that's what happens. So, gentlemen, I want to thank all of you so much, and I will thank all of our listeners and all of our folks on Facebook. We did not even have time to acknowledge them. The conversation was so deep and involved. Sorry we couldn't take more calls, but I want to thank Thompson and Kent and Lampy and Lennox and Bernard and Sherwin and everybody who made this broadcast possible tonight. I want to wish you a very, very good night. We'll continue this conversation sometime, gentlemen, and I hope this forum can be created to get that conversation going in earnest. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. God bless.
Thank you, Sheridan. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All the best.
Thank you, guys. Talk soon.
All the best.
Yes.
All right.
All right. Good, man. Okay. How do I get out?
Oh,